Chapter 1394. Yang Chendong stood at the side and listened attentively. From time to time, he would nod his head to show that he understood Chun Bo's previous actions. When the other party was almost done, he asked, "Previously, I asked the Far Eastern Army to reclaim the wasteland. How is it going?" Speaking of wasteland, Chun Bo immediately perked up. "Sixth young master, according to your instructions, this is what we've been doing during this period of time. With the efforts of 500,000 people, we've reclaimed a total of 20 million mu of land in the past 5 years. The land here is really fertile. Although it's affected by the weather and can't be compared to the south of the Great Ming Dynasty, where we can harvest twice or even thrice a year, the yield of crops here is very high and the taste of the crops is also very fragrant. The Far Eastern region had black soil and was very suitable for planting crops. Just like in the future, the 3 eastern provinces became the base for producing crops because of this reason." Hearing that 20 million mu of land had already been reclaimed, Yang Chendong nodded heavily. "Not bad. Your work is still very effective." Finally being praised, Chun Bo's expression became a little better. At least he wasn't completely useless. At least he didn't let down the work he had done for the past few years. Right, this time, the Mongolian cavalry suddenly appeared. Has the food been hidden properly? Yang Chendong suddenly thought of a very important question. Next, he wanted to develop the Far Eastern region. This wasn't just because of the bet he made with Yumian. Most importantly, this was an important chess piece for him to enter Europe through the land route. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Therefore, he decided to personally set up the troops here to establish a solid bridge to enter Europe. It's all hidden. Only the commanders and I of the Guard Regiment know the location. Even the other commanders don't know. You know that the soldiers of the Guard Regiment are all Han Chinese. Most of them are youths from Crimson City. Some of them are from the Cold Front. They are all trustworthy. This time, the food is intact. This is enough to prove everything. Good, this matter is well done. If one wanted to develop a place, they had to solve the problem of their stomachs first. If one couldn't even fill their stomachs, how could they talk about development? How about this? Take out all the food. Next, whether it is building a city or repairing roads, we will need a lot of able-bodied men, and able-bodied men can eat the most." Hearing that the food was fine, Yang Chendong breathed a sigh of relief. At the same time, he felt more confident. Build a city? Chun Bo was stunned. This was the first time he had heard of such a thing. Yang Chendong smiled and nodded. "That's right. If we want to develop the Far Eastern region, just one owl city isn't enough. These 2 days, I also looked at the terrain here. Although the city can still be expanded, it's very limited due to geographical reasons. Since that's the case, it's better to build a few more cities. Only in this way can we arrange more people in the city and solve the worries of the soldiers. Only with a unified mindset can we be motivated and quickly develop the Far Eastern region so that this place can finally reach a state of self-sufficiency." After saying this, Yang Chendong seemed to have thought of something. He sighed and said, "Chun Bo, the importance of the Far Eastern region is far more important than you think. In the future, this place will become an important strategic location like Biani City. In the future, if we expand from here to the west, it's definitely impossible to rely on external logistical support. Therefore, building a strong logistical foundation here is the most important thing right now. It can be said that the prosperity of the Far Eastern region is directly related to how big the blades of the 5-star army can expand in the future." Hearing that the Far Eastern region was so important, Chun Bo was shocked. He originally thought that Yang Chendong had his eyes on this place because it was sparsely populated and could become a new granary for Yangxie. Therefore, he put all his focus on reclaiming wastelands. But now, after hearing this idea, he realized that his vision was still too limited and his thinking was too petty. Yang Chendong saw Chun Bo's shocked expression and understood. He sighed again and said, calculating the time, "Wu Sheng has been in the Golden Horde for 7 years. The reason why he hasn't been transferred back is to wait for the right time to let him, this chess piece, display his greatest power. And if we only manage the territory in the Far East, then wouldn't his efforts over the past few years have been in vain?" "I see. Qinbo finally understood that the construction and development of the Far Eastern region wasn't done on a whim by the sixth young master. It was planned as early as 7 years ago, or even earlier. Yang Shandong felt that there were some things that could be said more seriously today. So he looked at Qinbo and asked with a serious expression, "Qinbo, the five-star army's territory is already big enough. So why are we still expanding? I'm sure the people below must have a lot of opinions about this." Qinbo didn't want to talk at first, but looking at Yang Shandong's serious expression, he could only bite the bullet and say, "The people below have some opinions. But it's not the majority. There are still more people who like to work with the sixth young master. Especially some young people. They still want to build military achievements and are afraid that there won't be any more wars to fight. Wouldn't their years of training be useless in the end?" Yang Shandong laughed when he heard Qinbo's explanation. Young people wanted to build their careers, so they naturally wanted to participate in wars. Only then would they have a chance. But other than them, there were probably more people who didn't want to continue fighting. After all, peace was what everyone wanted. Other than a few extreme people, no one wanted war to happen. If it was possible, why would Yang Shandong want to start a war? He wanted to be with his wife and children, and it would be great to have a family reunion. But reality didn't allow him to do so. This was because he wasn't sure how long Yang Xie could maintain her glory. In history, the Great Ming Dynasty was the center of the world. Other than the land of the Great Ming Dynasty, the other places were just barren lands. The things of the Great Ming Dynasty were the best, and the people of the Great Ming Dynasty were the most advanced race. Then, the two Opium Wars completely woke the Chinese people up. It turned out that we weren't the most advanced. It turned out that the Europeans had almost robbed the whole world. It turned out that we were already far behind. Then what were we doing? Didn't we know? We knew. Since the Tang Dynasty, China had been the center of the world. During the Song Dynasty, the southeast coast was full of Arab merchant ships. At that time, the Song Dynasty had begun to transform from a primitive natural economy to a market economy. It was even more so during the Zhou Ming Dynasty. When Zheng He went to the Western Ocean, who didn't admire him? Many countries were proud to be able to pay tribute to the Great Ming Dynasty. But that was it. When the Great Ming Dynasty entered the Yingzong Dynasty, it was equivalent to entering the middle of the Ming Dynasty. After that, it was a downward slope. In the end, it was covered by history and was ruled by a group of Tatars who only had millions of people. How sad it was to think about it. If Yang Shandong stopped now, he couldn't guarantee that his descendants wouldn't be destroyed one day, and they wouldn't be ruled by other foreign races. In order for that day to not appear, he had to work harder now. For example, when the world was unified and the Han people became the rulers, even if his descendants failed to live up to expectations and lost the world, the people who could replace them would definitely be Han people. It could be considered as meat rotting in a pot. Not many people could understand his thoughts because they had never experienced it before, so they couldn't think of it. Yang Shandong was different. History had already told him everything. When he was young, he had thought that if one day he had the ability, he would definitely let those foreign races know that the nobility of the Han people was not to be blasphemed. He would also not forgive those people for their actions. He could not forgive the foreign races for invading China when it was declining. He could not forgive the tolerance of China for being used as an opportunity for them to make a comeback. He couldn't forgive them for leaving behind a mess every time they came and left. He could not forgive their betrayal, their despicable actions that were worse than pigs and dogs, as early as the era of Confucius. Zhou Wanghan was forced to the brink of destruction by the warhounds. The western capital Chang and fell, and King Ping moved the capital to Luoyang, barely surviving the crisis. It was in that year that countless Chinese women were humiliated by the barbarians. Their blood was stained with tears, and their corpses were a warning to us, warning us not to be merciful to the foreign races. The results of the Spring and Autumn War. Taking advantage of the internal divisions of China, the Xiongnu flourished and led the barbarians to invade China. They burned, killed, and plundered, committing all kinds of crimes. This blood debt had been settled for many years, so it was time to settle it. And this settlement work would be completed by him. As for those who said that he was militaristic, that he killed people like scything flax, that he ostracized the foreign races, that he didn't have the magnanimity of a large country, that he didn't have a broad mind, that was up to them. Yang Qindong had his own principles, and now that he had the ability, he had to do everything he wanted to do. He had to do it to the best of his ability, to the extreme. Chunbo left in the end. He was removed from his position as the commander of the Far Eastern Army, but there was no bitterness on his face. On the contrary, he was excited by Yang Qindong's words about developing the Far Eastern region, because this proved that his time had come. 2 days later, Tian Hu won the battle and brought the captive Mongolian cavalry and Belinsky's caravan to Al City. Chunbo knew about Belinsky. This person had a good head for business, and his business was very big. In the past Al City, he could be considered one of the top merchants. Of course, he would not forget that it was this person who instigated the 4th Division's commander, Tang Sheng, to attack the Far Eastern Army. Now that he heard that this person had been captured, he quickly went to find Yang Qindong. He wanted this person to die and take revenge for the thousands of soldiers who had sacrificed themselves. Chapter 1395. When Chunbo arrived at the governor's mansion, he saw Belinsky standing in the reception hall, meeting with Yang Qindong. Yang Qindong sat high above and looked at Belinsky with great interest. He was the only one standing in the middle of the field. On his left was Beta Persei, and below him were Tian Hu, the 1st Cavalry Division's division commander Temu as well as the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division's division commander Dai Qua and the others. After Chunbo arrived, Dai Qua and the others immediately greeted him. Then he stood together with them and listened to Belinsky, who was standing in the center of the room, speak with fervor and assurance. This Belinsky was quite capable. In terms of language, he could speak Chinese, Russian, and Mongolian dialects. At this moment, he was speaking very fluent Chinese, which did not sound awkward, about some of the strange stories in Siberia and some of the things he had encountered in the mountains. Belinsky's face was very calm, and he even introduced himself proudly, King Wunan of Damyong. This humble one's home is in Siberia, and I've seen many Mongolian troops burning and looting everywhere. They're a group of bandits, and they only know how to snatch good things. Of course, in their eyes, anything that is useful is a good thing. They really look like they haven't seen the world. When he was working with the Mongolian army, his words were full of flattery. He said things like the Mongolian army was the strongest army in the world, and the Mongolians were the noblest people in the world. However, when it came to belittling them, he did not give them any face at all. Those who did not know would think that he had a deep grudge with the Mongolian army. In fact, in the entire Siberia, Hulahin is not the only Mongolian cavalry. As far as this humble one knows, there are 7 or 8 other forces of different sizes. The only difference is that compared to Hulahin, they're poorer and weaker. Apart from that, there are also a few native Russian tribes. Some of them have become quite powerful and have their own protection teams. If it weren't for the fact that they lack weapons and battle experience, they wouldn't be much weaker than the Mongolian cavalry in terms of numbers. Respected King Wunan of Damyong, this humble one can contact these people, and we've done business with them in the past, so we have some friendship. As long as you give the order, this humble one can bring your greetings to them. I'm sure that at that time, everyone can form an alliance to deal with the Mongolian cavalry. Honorable King Wunan of the great Ming dynasty, this lowly one has traveled to various places as a merchant. I'm very clear about where there are small paths and where there is a main road through which an army can march. If your majesty needs, this lowly one can present a self-drawn map at any time. It will certainly play a big role in your majesty's control of the situation there in the future. Respected King Wunan of Damyong, this humble one. Belinsky was like a long-tongued woman who didn't know what fatigue was. He kept his mouth open for more than an hour, to the point that his saliva was flying everywhere and his lips were starting to crack. Finally, he shut his mouth. Perhaps there were still some things that he hadn't said, but based on his experience, he had already said a lot. This was enough to please this young Bugnom of Gojoseon. As for taking out everything in his heart, only a fool would do such a thing. Since the two of them were working together, he had to keep some trump cards. Otherwise, how could he fight for the initiative in the future? Seeing that Belinsky had finally shut his mouth, Yang Chendong smiled and nodded with satisfaction. Then, he looked at Ba Daojiang and said, "Take him away. He's tired. Don't let him talk too much. Let him draw out the map of Siberia that he knows." "Yes," Ba Daojiang replied. He had already seen the meaning in Yang Chendong's eyes. He had to properly entertain this foreign profiteer and dig out all the things in his head. At the very least, he had to make sure that he wouldn't cooperate. Under all kinds of torture, he wasn't worried that he wouldn't open his mouth. Ba Daojiang agreed, but Belinsky didn't understand. He raised his right hand and shouted, "Wait, respected King Wenan of Damyong, you haven't said how we should cooperate." "Cooperate? Why should we cooperate?" Yang Chendong laughed as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. "You don't want to cooperate? If you don't cooperate, why should I draw a map for you?" A trace of panic appeared on Belinsky's face. When he was talking about himself, he didn't say where he came from, but I. Perhaps this was his true thought. In his heart, he did not respect Yang Chendong that much. It was only because the situation was not as good as Yang Chendong that he had to say this. "You know how to draw a map." Seeing that Belinsky still wanted to make a fair deal with him at this time, Yang Chendong laughed loudly. He was confident that after Ba Daojiang made his move, the other party would soon know why the flowers were so red. At that time, he would say what he knew, and those who didn't, he would talk nonsense. Yang Chendong's eyes revealed a look of disdain. He was treating Belinsky as a captive, which made the merchant unable to remain calm. He was originally a little flustered, but now he shouted, "No, you can't treat me like this. I'm here to discuss business with you. If you do this, it will make me disappointed." "Wrong. You're not here to discuss business with this king. You're this king's captive. You were captured by Commander Tianhu. Everyone can testify to this." Yang Chendong couldn't allow the other party to slander the reputation of the five-star army. Although they killed people like flies, they still had their reputation. He would still keep his word to his friends. Belinsky suddenly remembered that he was indeed brought here by Tianhu. Although he chose not to resist the five-star army's cavalry, and even wanted to use the opportunity to meet Yang Chendong to prove his ability and practical value. However, it was also true that he was a captive. From the looks of it, he had miscalculated. He couldn't use his status as a captive as an excuse. He rolled his eyes and shouted again, "I'm a big merchant of the Russian tribe. I have many powerful friends in Siberia. If Bugnam of Gojoseon wants to harm me, do you think it will anger them? Once they join forces with the powerful Mongolian cavalry, I'm afraid Arching will change hands a second time." Belinsky's face was full of threat as he spoke. He was just short of saying, "Uncle B is very angry, and the consequences will be very serious." "Are you threatening me?" Yang Chendong was stunned at first, and then he looked up to the sky and laughed. The other high-ranking officers of the five-star army in the other halls couldn't help but laugh out loud as if they had heard the funniest joke in the world. Belinsky blushed as he looked at everyone. Although he didn't know what he had said wrong, he knew that these people were looking down on him when he saw how they were laughing. He thought that if he didn't argue now, he would be captured by the ferocious five-star army. His life would be worse than death, so he needed to save himself. Just as everyone was laughing, he suddenly shouted, "Don't think that I'm joking. Let me tell you, many tribes are still waiting for me to do business with them. Without me, they won't have a trade route. They will get angry and become enemies with you. How about this? Let me go immediately, and I'm willing to donate all my wealth. I will go back and tell those tribes that the five-star army is friendly and that Bugnam of Gojoseon is great. I guarantee that they won't have any ideas about you." It was half a threat and half a plea. When things didn't develop as he expected, Belinsky really panicked. He was afraid of death because he had money. He was more afraid of death than anyone else. When he realized that money couldn't save his life or bring him glory, his heart was in a mess. "Oh, you still want to continue trading with those people? Do they have money?" Yang Chendong finally asked with interest. His efforts didn't go to waste. Belinsky wasn't afraid of being asked questions, but he was afraid that the other party would ignore him. He immediately became spirited and said, "Respected Bugnam of Gojoseon, although they don't have money, they have things that we can trade with. For example, they live in the mountains all year round, so they have good tiger skin, tiger bones, tiger penis, tiger meat, ginseng, and all kinds of animal fur. They're all good things and are very valuable outside." "Oh, they have good things, so it's worth it to trade with them." Yang Qindong nodded in satisfaction. Then his gaze fell on Belinsky and said, "But you don't have to make such a trade. Our Yangxia has many excellent merchants. You just need to tell us the locations of those tribes. As for your assets, they were seized and will definitely be confiscated. Also, you colluded with Tang Sheng and the others to destroy our arching and kill this king's people. This debt needs to be settled. All right, take him away and treat him well. Make him spit out everything in his stomach. If he doesn't say anything, just kill him." Yang Qindong waved his hand impatiently. Ba Daojiang, who had been waiting at the side, strode forward and lifted Belinsky, who weighed more than 50 kilograms, out of the hall. Even after they left the hall, Belinsky was still screaming like a pig being slaughtered. "You can't do this to me. Otherwise, you'll definitely attract the anger of the other tribes. You'll definitely regret it." No one took Belinsky's threats seriously. Regardless of whether it was the Mongol or Russian soldiers, if they didn't come, why would the five-star army look for them? If they surrendered, everything would be fine. Those who were guilty would be punished, and those who weren't would be given land to farm. They would be squeezed dry. Chapter 1396. Thank you to Moral Student 609, G. Pingon, and Blazing Flame for their monthly votes. Thank you to Longzi. Over the years, who had the five-star army feared on the battlefield? After Belinsky was taken away, the hall became much quieter. However, seeing the excitement on the faces of Chunbo and the others, it was clear that they were happy to treat someone who had brought disaster to the Far Eastern Army like this. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yang Qindong also decided to talk about the problems of merchants. Before, the Far Eastern province had been busy with two things. One was building a city, and the other was reclaiming land. As for the matter of merchants, it had been ignored. This was not to say that merchants were not important, but before they had a place to live and food to fill their stomachs, who would have time to do business? With a light cough, Yang Qindong shifted everyone's attention to himself. He said, "Without agriculture, there is no stability, and without merchants, there is no wealth." This king does not need to say more. Everyone knows this. If the Far Eastern province wants to become powerful, it cannot avoid using trade routes. Later, this king will send a telegram to encourage some Yangxia merchants to come and develop here. When the time comes, everyone will have to cooperate. Understood? Yes. Yang Qindong's words were equivalent to an order. Everyone nodded in agreement. In this era, merchants were not looked down upon. They were seen as people who reaped without sowing. And scrupulous merchants were what people generally thought of them. Yang Qindong did not agree with this point of view. It was too arbitrary to say that merchants were lowly based on the fact that they only cared about profits. Wasn't it said that all merchants in the world came for profits, and all merchants went for profits? Back in the pre-Qin era, people had this understanding. Why did everyone still think that only merchants cared about profits? In his opinion, it was not merchants who cared about profits, but everyone in the world. It was necessary to allow, prevent, guide, restrict, and use at the same time. Just like you the Great controlling the flood, it was better to guide it than to block it. We can develop commerce. We can develop industry. We can liberate the productive forces. We can liberate the mind and everything that can be liberated. Yangxia cannot do without commerce, and even more so cannot take commerce lightly. On the contrary, commerce and agriculture should be placed on the same level of importance. The only difference was that it was based on agriculture and focused on commerce. For the places that we can't go for the time being, we can let the merchants be the vanguard. Through the merchants, we can control everything in those countries, and we can control everything in the merchants. Some people would think that capturing captives and serving the corvée is inhumane, not benevolent and righteous enough, and not enough to show the demeanor of Yang Xie. In the face of these doubts, Yang Qindong threw them aside for the time being. Innovation meant that he had to go through a process from not understanding to understanding. In this process, he did not intend to listen to other people's opinions. In his mind, there were too many successful experiences of the later generations. He just needed to use them and did not need to prove them. Since that was the case, why would he need to listen to other people's opinions that were not correct? With the momentum of his own words, Yang Qindong passed a decision to develop the Far Eastern region in the future. This was the benefit of him building his own empire. If he believed that something was right, then there was no need to discuss it with others, and there was no need to listen to other people's opinions. Usually, only the founding emperor could enjoy this kind of treatment. Even in the second generation, it was difficult to do things so happily. From time to time, there would be people who would use the ancestral rules and regulations to stop the wise ruler from doing things that would benefit the people in the country. The matter of the merchants was put aside for now. When the Real merchants came, Yang Qindong would have a good talk with them. Not only did he need the merchants to pay more taxes, he also needed to understand the situation of the various forces in Siberia through these merchants. He believed that they would definitely surprise him. After Belinsky was taken away, Yang Qindong got someone to bring over a sand table while everyone was still around. He brought up the matter of building a city and building a road that he had discussed with Chun Bo, pointing at the sand table. Yang Qindong said loudly, "Considering the Far Eastern region's vast territory and sparse population, it is impossible to completely control this place with just arching. This king has decided that apart from arching, we will first build 4 cities. They will be in Ding City in the northeast of Mount Alloy. That will become the core of the Far Eastern region's northeast. After the city is built, we will use it as a starting point to develop it. It can also become the granary of the Far Eastern region and provide all kinds of food. Build a Han city south of Archon, which is near the Stanab Mountains, outer Xing'an Mountains. It will be a huge transit station that will be responsible for the future communication between the Far Eastern region and the Han. Build Tongbei City south of the Han City by the Urguna River, near the present Mo. It will be an important hub that connects the 3 eastern provinces. In the future, the resources sent from the Yangtze provinces will all pass through here. It will be more convenient and faster, and it will also reduce the losses on the road. Build Alei City west of Arching in the upper Yansk Mountains. It will be the front line of the military and constantly monitor the various weapons factions in Siberia. Once they have any intentions, it will become the western gate to prevent them from sending troops to the Far Eastern region. This will ensure the safety of the rear and allow for peace of mind. After pointing at the 4 places, Yang Qindong put down the baton in his hand and looked at everyone present. Choosing these 4 places wasn't just because of Yang Qindong's whim. It was a combination of distance, geographical location, mineral resources, water sources, and whether the surrounding land was flat or not. It was based on the development of the Far Eastern region in the future. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that even if there was a fake beast, it would be impossible to find a more suitable place. No objections. Everyone shook their heads and said. Among them, except for Chun Bo, who had experience in governing a place, the others were all generals. They only knew that wherever Yang Qindong pointed, they would fight there. Good, then it's decided. Yang Qindong also knew that talking too much about this topic was like playing the lute to a cow, so he simply decided to be direct. After choosing the location, it was time to arrange the manpower. During the Zhu dynasty, there was no so-called industry, and technology was not developed. Many things needed a large number of people to complete. For a huge project like building a city, it was unknown how much labor was needed to complete it. For example, in the previous Al City, there were 500,000 Yangtze citizens and tens of thousands of Far Eastern Army soldiers in the city. It only took them a year to build the outline of the city. When the city had a scale, it was already a few years later. Labor was indispensable in building a city. The more, the better. The great man Grandpa Mao once said that there was strength in numbers. This also explained why it was easier to do things with more people. Al City, which had just experienced a riot, now had a population that was 20% less than before. In other words, there were only about 400,000 citizens. Thus, it was easy to imagine how difficult it would be to complete the 4 new cities before the arrival of winter. At least at this time, Chunbo lowered his head and didn't say anything. He had experienced this kind of thing before, so he knew better than anyone how difficult it would be. On the other hand, the other generals didn't care. They believed in Yang Chendong. Since the 6th young master said that it could be built, it would definitely be built. As for what to do, it was still the same sentence. They only needed to do what he said. No one said anything. Yang Chendong didn't point to anyone to answer his question. He opened his mouth again and said, "Has the food been transported to the city?" This sentence was, of course, directed to Chunbo. Previously, he had hidden the food because he didn't have much confidence in the safety of Al City. But now that Yang Chendong was here, Chunbo naturally felt relieved. He didn't believe that there was anyone in the world who could take something away from the 6th young master. The food has been transported to the city. Now, all the large granaries in the city are full. There are still many stored in the original cellars. Chunbo said with his chest puffed out and his head held high. This was the only thing he was proud of in the Far East for a few years. Good. The rest of the food doesn't need to be transported to the granaries in the city. Just divide it into 4 and send it to the other 4 cities. Yang Chendong nodded. With enough food, he had enough confidence to do things. Tianhu, when you go back, distribute the horse meat that died in these battles. You can also form a hunting team and go into the dense forests and deep mountains to hunt wild beasts. At the same time, you can also let people go down to fish. Remember, don't take the small fish. Even if you catch them, you have to put them back. If you want to catch, you have to catch the big fish. The next work will be very tiring. It won't be enough to just have food without meat. Yang Chendong looked at Tianhu, but these words were also for everyone to hear. As the saying goes, the emperor doesn't lack hungry soldiers. If you want a horse to run, you have to feed it grass. The horse's mane and tail had to be kept. They were strategic resources. The horse couldn't be wasted. Although it couldn't be made into leather armor, it was still better than nothing. The soldiers of the 5-star army couldn't use it, but it was still a hot commodity if sold to ordinary people. Horse meat was, of course, the most precious. It was shaved off from the bones and mixed with wine to detoxify it. The taste was very good. The bones of the horse couldn't be thrown away. They were thrown into the pot to make soup. It was one of the world's delicacies. Then the bones were smashed open. The bone marrow inside was so fragrant that it made people bite their tongue. The internal organs of the horse were also good things. The heart, liver, spleen, stomach, and kidneys could all be cooked together. The large intestines and small intestines were also one of the best ingredients. A pot of horse offal was also a famous dish. When the time came, coupled with the game obtained from hunting, the meat problem could basically be solved. This was the case for this year. However, they couldn't always use this method in the future. If they hunted more, the number of wild beasts would naturally decrease. If the fish were too small, they couldn't catch them. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to eat fish in the future. Since they had decided to develop in the long run, it was impossible to not have a long-term vision. The kind of fishing in a pond would only be done when there was no other way. Chapter 1397. After the food problem was solved, Yang Chendong's next speech revolved around 3 major points. First, build 4 cities to ensure that everyone could live in the cities and have their own houses to keep warm before the winter snowfall. Second, build roads. The roads between the 5 cities, including Archeong, had to be built so that 3 carriages could pass side by side without congestion. Only in this way could they ensure the smooth flow of information and ensure that if one side was in trouble, there would be reinforcements from all sides. Third, continue to cultivate wastelands. The commander of the new Second Army that followed Yang Chendong not only escorted a large amount of supplies and tens of thousands of soldiers, but also millions of Yangtze's people. The more people there were, the more food they needed. If there wasn't enough land, they wouldn't even be able to solve the problem of food and clothing. How could they talk about development? It should be mentioned here that the Zhu dynasty still hadn't completely solved the problem of the people's bellies. This wasn't because they didn't work hard, but because the difference between the output of the land and the food that the people needed was too big. For example, in the current Great Ming Dynasty, other than potatoes, one mu of land could only produce a little more than 1 dan of grain per year. But how much grain could an ordinary young man eat in a year? A full 5 dan. In other words, 5 mu of land was needed to feed a young man. In this way, it would be strange if there wasn't enough grain to eat. Often, people would only be half full. This was also the reason why people at that time always looked sallow and emaciated. In contrast, the reason why Yangtze didn't lack grain was because the land was large enough. Compared to their small population, the proportion of land was still very high. Secondly, they had high-yield crops like potatoes, sweet potatoes, and corn. These crops could easily produce 7 to 8 dan, 10 dan, or even 20 dan of grain per year. The emergence of these crops greatly alleviated the problem of Yangtze's lack of grain. Not only that, they could also be sold to the outside world. This was all because they had a good foundation. In addition, Yangtze had built many greenhouses. Even in winter, there were still vegetables to eat. This made many Yangtze territories no longer have the concept of no vegetables in winter. Naturally, food was not a problem. Yang Qindong proposed 3 general directions and began to arrange the work. As the governor of the Far Eastern region, Chun Bo was naturally responsible for the construction of the 4 cities. Tianhu's 1st Cavalry Army was responsible for the defense of the battlefront, hunting in the forest, and fishing in the water. In short, he was responsible for the supply of meat. The new 2nd Army's 1st Cavalry Army was responsible for the reclamation of the land and the construction of winter greenhouses. Yang Qindong would personally oversee the construction of the roads. He also wanted to take advantage of the time when the roads were being repaired to take a look at the mines and minerals in the area. He wanted to prepare the raw materials for the construction of the factories in the future. After the meeting, everyone received their tasks and began to get busy. At the same time, the first batch of laborers was brought to the 4 cities in batches. Chun Bo personally led them, and the Far Eastern Army soldiers were responsible for escorting them to the 4 cities. These laborers were mainly Mongolian captives. Other than that, there were also soldiers from the Far Eastern Army's 4th Cavalry Division. They had followed Tang Sheng onto the wrong path, and now it was time for them to redeem themselves. There were also people like Qi Wu, Zhang Mian, and Li Dei who had joined Tang Sheng later on. It must be said that they had been wronged. They had made the wrong choice at the last moment, and now they had become criminals. They needed to serve in the military and return to their original identities. Other than these laborers, Yang Qindong also allowed the people of the Far Eastern region and the various tribes to participate. As long as they worked, whether it was building cities, repairing roads, or reclaiming land, they would receive corresponding rewards. After that, they would use the Chinese currency printed by Yangtze to buy food and daily necessities from the 5 cities. These people could also apply to join the Yang faction, but they needed to apply in advance. After that, their performance would depend on their performance. If they proved that there were no problems within 3 months to half a year, they would be issued a special identity certificate issued by the Yang faction. With this certificate, they would be considered good citizens. Mobilizing the people and making them work for one's own use. This was the successful experience of the later generations. However, it was still a first, and once the news came out, it attracted a lot of discussion and influence. As long as the people lived under the leadership of any faction, they would need to serve in the military. It's free labor, just because it's your job. If they did not perform well during this period, they would be scolded and beaten. This was regarded as a matter of course by the people. In the Yangtze faction, not only was this exempted, but if you were willing to work, you could also receive a high wage. Some people calculated that if 2 people in a family of 5 were willing to work to earn wages, then they would be able to support the family and ensure that the 5 of them would not starve. If 3 people were willing to work, then they would be able to eat their fill and wear warm clothes. Although it was still far from a well-off life, it was still considered an ordinary family. At the end of the year, there would still be some savings. Therefore, when this policy began to spread, especially by the local people like Nikolai who supported the five-star army. More and more Russian people who were hiding in the mountains began to come out and rush to the nearest Yangtze city. Never underestimate the power of the people. Especially under Yang Qindong's proposal, all the labor paid would not be calculated by the day, nor by the month, but by the value of the labor. In other words, the people who could work would earn more, and the people who could not work would earn less. A contract responsibility system was implemented. In this way, the enthusiasm of the people was greatly aroused. Not only did the people earn more money and live a better life, but it also increased the speed of the construction of the four cities and the development of the wasteland. When Chun Bo heard the progress of the work from his subordinates, he was stunned. If this method could have been used during the construction of Arles City, the city would have been a completely different sight now. Of course, this was just Chun Bo's imagination. Some of the innovations were not something he could think of. He did not have Yang Qindong's influence, nor did he have his decisiveness. If the same thing was done by him, when some of the policies were implemented, it would inevitably lead to all kinds of discussions and doubts. In short, the reforms were not something that could be changed by just anyone. It also depended on the specific strength of the person who implemented it. Half a month later, the commander of the mercenary corps finally arrived at Al City. Not only did they bring 1 million Yangtze people with them, but they also brought all kinds of rare materials. For example, explosives to blow up mountains, cement to pave roads, and so on. At this point, the entire far eastern region fell into a heated atmosphere. Everyone's faces were filled with hope for the future. Facts also proved that there were no lazy people in the world. When they felt that the effort and the reward were proportional, everyone would unconsciously unleash their potential and do everything well. When small things were done, they would become big things when put together. The development of the far eastern region entered the fast lane. It was even faster than Yang Qindong imagined. Not only did the people of the far eastern region respond positively, but the tribes hiding in the mountains also came out. Even the people of Siberia, who heard the news, crossed thousands of mountains and rivers to come here. They wanted to have something to eat, to not be frozen in winter, and to have a safe haven. Yang Qindong adopted a reward system for these foreign people who came because of the reputation. Those who came first could only be slaves. After that, they had to work hard and contribute enough to become commoners. In the end, they could get rid of their temporary identity card and get an official identity card of an ordinary citizen. If there were people who performed well, they could be promoted to Han citizen. One of the reward systems was that they could report people who were doing bad things. This way, they could find all suspicious people through supervision and there would not be any loopholes. At the same time, if they were serious about their work, they could often exceed the quota and lead others to do better. They would be seen as role models. Also, if they were to spread rumors, they could attract more people to be used by the five-star army. These were all meritorious deeds that were of great help to the evaluation. With the perfection of the system and mutual supervision, many people with unknown identities were quickly found out. After the investigation by the Security Bureau, they found that most of them were spies from the Mongolian army and belonged to various forces. There were also a few spies from the large Russian tribes. They doubted the authenticity of the five-star army building a city in Dali and sent people over to investigate. For such people, Yang Qindong ordered his men to release them. He even asked his men to show them around the cities so that they could have a better understanding of what the five-star army was doing. This would make it easier for them to make the right choice. What made people not know whether to laugh or cry was that there were spies from Baiming and southern Ming among these people. It was really difficult for them to come here from thousands of miles away just to see what the five-star army was doing. When Beta Persei reported the discovery of spies from the Great Ming Dynasty to Yang Qindong, he could not help but sigh. It seems that both Baiming and southern Ming have already seen me as a great enemy. Forget it. It won't be long before I deal with them anyway. I'll just detain these spies. If they're willing to stay, I'll arrange jobs for them and see what happens. As for those who refuse to change, I'll just kill them. Yang Qindong did not boast that he was a saint. He would never be soft-hearted towards his enemies. If he did not do so, he would not be able to achieve the great goal of the world and the supremacy of the Han people. Chapter 1398. Thank you, Moral Student 609, Yuan Zinan's monthly votes and rewards. Lanzi thanks you. The work in the Far East region was in full swing. The results were much faster than the original plan, and all the work was progressing at a high speed. Compared to the changes in the Far East region, under the leadership of Tiger's Man and Yumian, the mining work had already started after spring. Because they had already investigated and knew the approximate location of the mines, the mining work went very smoothly. A large amount of the resources needed by the Yangtze were mined. Other than a portion left in the first city, the rest were sent to Qiqian City for effective use. The battle in the Li region also achieved some results. The most important thing was taking down Yi Erqiang's tribe. The newly established New Five armies had also received a public call from Yang Qindong to praise them. The first army, led by Bai Shuang, also turned a small victory into a big victory in the Li region. After Prime Minister Ali Pu was captured by the intelligence department of the Five-Star Army, King Baolide felt that he couldn't do anything by himself. In the end, he made a difficult choice. He submitted to the Timur Empire, which was far away from them, and requested for them to send troops to help him. The actions of the Five-Star Army had already attracted the attention of the Timur Empire, especially after the new Five-Star Army took down the Yirqiang tribe and sent troops to the Yusang region. Although they hadn't really fought from the direction of the troops, a huge battle was unavoidable. Without the lips, the teeth would feel cold. Even if it was to ensure his own safety, the Timur Empire couldn't watch the Five-Star Army grow stronger. At this moment, the actions of the Five-Star Army were very similar to their ancestors. Genghis Khan and his descendants attacked and occupied one after another. In the end, the land was so big that people didn't dare to look at it directly. Their territory spanned from the Irtysh River in the west to the Sea of Okhotsk in the east. In the east, they owned the northeastern part of the Korean peninsula. In the southwest, they included the Kashmir region, Bhutan, Sikkim, and other places in the southern foot of the Himalayas, northeastern Myanmar, and northern Thailand. They swept through Russia and Ukraine, reaching Kiev, the current capital of Ukraine, and the Danube River. They destroyed the Germanic army in Hungary and forced their way to Venice in Italy. It had a land area of 44 million square kilometers. The performance of the Five-Star Army led by Yang Qindong was even better. No one was willing to see such a huge monster appear. It could be imagined that it wouldn't take long for the Timur Empire to make a move. As for whether they would send an emissary to dissuade them or directly dispatch troops, that would depend on the development of the battlefield. Let's talk about the Navy. Since they went to sea in March, they have been invincible all the way. The battleships were equipped with the most advanced cannons. In addition, the new ships were much faster than the ships of other forces. The Cold Front Navy was almost invincible. In just 2 months, they had conquered Sumatra in the south and Manchuria in the north, completing the task of controlling the Straits of Malacca. Following which, they headed straight for Sri Lanka, following the route that Zheng He took when he went to the Western Ocean. The difference was that the Cold Front Navy was much more ferocious. Wherever they went, there was either submission or death. There was no third choice. The situation was very good. Yang Qindong, who was in the Far East, was relieved and wholeheartedly directed the road construction. With Beta Persei, an all-round deputy, Yang Qindong only needed to take care of the general situation. This also gave him more time to look for various minerals. There were some maps in the warehouse that recorded the relevant information. With this, he had already led people to find 3 large mines. Conservatively, one of the iron mines could meet the needs of the Far East for the next 30 years. The rest could also be used to support the armament factory in Qiqian City. When the news was sent back to Qiqian City, several teams of experts quickly set out. The current armament factory was developing very quickly, resulting in a shortage of resources. If they could really solve the problem of raw materials, it could be imagined that the development of the armament factory would soon reach a new level. Time passed month by month. In the 9th month of 1461 AD, good news kept coming. In the 9th month, the 6th Madam, Wan Xiaoyu, gave birth to Yang Qindong's second son. In the 10th month, Xiao Yuxue gave birth to a son named Yang Jun. A few days later, Dong Xiangxiang gave birth to a daughter named Yang Nua. In the 11th month, Tuoya gave birth to a daughter named Yang Ting. Not long after, Sumaner gave birth to a son named Yang Zhao. In the 12th month, another 2,000 gold pieces were added. They were the pure daughter Yang Xian at the beginning of the month, and Huyan's daughter Yang Lin at the end of the year. That's right, the year 1461 was considered a bumper harvest year. This bumper harvest did not only refer to the great progress in various aspects of military and local politics, but also the expansion of the royal family. In 3 months, there were 3 more men and 4 more women. It had to be said that Yang Qindong's ability was very good. After staying in Qiqian City for a few months and working hard, there was finally a return. The only regret was that Yang Qindong could not rush back. At this time, it was snowing heavily in the Far East. The 4 newly built cities could finally be put to use. Although the city walls had been built in a short period of time, the number of houses in the cities was still a little low. Yang Qindong had no choice but to take out the auditorium that was built first. Although it was a little crowded and noisy, the floor of the auditorium was still warm, which brought a sense of joy to all the foreign people who were temporarily staying here. Since young, they had never stayed in such a warm room before. They didn't even dare to think about it. But now, everything had come true. It was no wonder that everyone was so excited. Even when they were squeezed together, no one had any complaints. Including Al City, the appearance of a total of 5 cities brought a ray of warmth to the Far East in the cold winter. After the families of all the soldiers were properly settled, there were no other voices in the army. Especially after Yang Qindong brought up the slogan of making a new contribution in order to change himself and his family's living conditions, all the soldiers were thinking about one thing, and that was when they could go to war, when they could go to the battlefield, and let them have the opportunity to make contributions and receive rewards. Their fighting spirit was brewing, and they were only waiting for a suitable opportunity to release it. At that time, the fighting spirit of the 5-star army would be unstoppable. The cold winter would pass, and spring would come. At the same time, it brought news from Yang Xie's caravan. The map of the Mongolian army in Siberia had been sent to Yang Qindong. Looking at the 2 cities of UST Kilima and Greater UST Koj, Yang Qindong's calm eyes flashed with fighting spirit. After finally finding the 2 main forces of the Mongolian army, Yang Qindong's fist landed on the table. Beta Persei summoned General Tianhu and General Sherbei for a discussion. 1462 AD, end of the 3rd month. The snow had just started to melt, and white snow could still be seen everywhere. The 5-star army had already gathered in Alei City. Soon after, under the command of General Yang Qindong, nearly 100,000 soldiers set off. They brought enough rations and equipment as they left the city. They wanted to make a name for themselves. After hearing the news that the 5-star army had already set off, many of the foreign race youths who stayed in the 5 cities had yearning, envy, and unshakable determination in their eyes. The treatment of the soldiers of the 5-star army was something that they had witnessed during this period of time. Excellent equipment, generous treatment, lofty status, respected social status. All of these were things that made people jealous and envious. They had also joined the army. In the past, they had worked hard for their tribe, and some had worked hard for the Mongolian army. However, that was because they did not have enough food to eat or warm clothes to wear. How could it be compared to working for the 5-star army? The difference in status and treatment caused the 5-star army soldiers to be filled with a sense of honor, and they were filled with the spirit of a master. One could imagine the spirit and fighting ability of this kind of army. It was not something that the Mongolian soldiers who were just trying to make a living could compare to. This kind of army was naturally very attractive. Regretfully, slaves did not have the right to sign up for the 5-star army. At the very least, they had to be commoners. If there were many people signing up, they would need to be commoners. Just like that, Many of the slaves who had just joined Yangtze not long ago lost a chance to join the army. Thinking about the treatment of the 5-star army soldiers and the delicious rice and food that they would occasionally help out in the army, one of the slaves could not help but drool. At the same time, he made up his mind to perform well and become a commoner as soon as possible. This way, he would have a chance to join the 5-star army in the next recruitment. Reward system, good treatment, and social status. These were the changes that Yang Chendong had made to the military system. In a subtle way, it solved the problem of the lack of soldiers. Compared to the other factions who moved for the king and shut up for the country, it was much more practical. Everyone had their own selfish motives. When they were respected and their lives were greatly improved, perhaps they would have more thoughts and their realms would increase. However, if someone did not even have enough food to eat or warm clothes to wear, what was the difference between saying loyalty to the king and serving the country? Even if they said these things, how much could they agree with it in their hearts? If they did not agree, how could they be proactive? Thinking about it, one was to be forced to go to war, and the other was to want to make military contributions and perform well on the battlefield. If these two armies met, what would the result be? Even an idiot would be able to guess who would win and who would lose. Yang Chendong brought the 5-star army with strong fighting spirit and left the Far East region, bringing the envy and yearning of countless people into Siberia. At the end of March, due to the geographical location of Siberia, the weather in Siberia was not as warm as in the south. It was only warm around noon when there was plenty of sunshine. At other times, especially at night, it was still very cold. As the snow melted, the roads became muddy and difficult to walk on. Chapter 1399. Any other army would not have chosen to set out at such a time. The damage to themselves would be far too severe. But for the 5-star army, the effect was very ordinary. Once the soldiers got used to this method of marching and got used to the environment and weather, it only took them 2 days to recover. Although their boots would still kick up mud when they stepped on the road, it no longer hindered their advance. Unlike the people of that time who liked to wear cloth shoes, those who were better off would wear leather boots. Those who were worse off would wear straw sandals. And even those who were poor would go barefoot. The soldiers of the 5-star army all wore leather boots that were the same size, allowing them to protect their feet to the greatest extent when they were marching, allowing them to walk in the forest full of boulders without suffering any injuries. Every soldier was given a standard sleeping bag, a water bottle, a wash basin, a bedding, a raincoat, a cotton coat, and so on. When they needed to use it, they would open it. When they were not using it, they would store it in a large bag and carry on their backs. In this way, they did not need to worry about the cold and slippery roads, allowing their movement speed to be unaffected by the weather. Just this set of equipment for each soldier cost around 10 taels of silver. Multiplied by the number of nearly 100,000 soldiers, this was still a huge sum. At the start, because this work required a lot of money, there were some people who objected, but Yang Chendong reasoned that soldiers had to shed blood in battle. Right now, they were just paying a bit more to ensure their safety on the road. What was not worth it? What could be compared to a human life? As soon as Yang Chendong's questioning voice came out, all the opposing voices disappeared. When this matter was spread, all the soldiers were moved to tears. Following this kind of commander, what complaints did they have? What reason did they have not to risk their lives? The speed of the army continued to increase, and they got closer and closer to their destination, Great Usage, or Great Usage for short. This time, the initial goal of the expedition was to conquer 2 big cities. Yang Chendong adopted a strategy of dividing the troops into 2. To the north was the Lima city of Ustchi, also known as Ustchi City. The army there was led by Tian Hu, the commander of the world's #1 cavalry army. He led 40,000 cavalry and 300,000 civilians as logistic support. The second group was personally led by Yang Chendong and consisted of more than 30,000 cavalrymen under the command of the new Second Army, as well as 20,000 men from the newly established Russian Division, White Division. At the same time, 300,000 civilians were supported. The so-called Foreign Russian Division referred to a foreign army composed of Russians. For example, Nikolai, whom Yang Chendong first met, served in this division. They were the first to join the five-star army and were infected by everything the other party had done for them. They had a common trait, which was that they were young and strong. They had once been the protectors of their small tribes. Now that Yang Chendong had unified the Far East, building cities, repairing roads, and opening up wastelands, their lives had changed. They could no longer hide like before and could finally walk out in the open, build their homes, and live safe and hopeful lives. As these young guardians, they joined the five-star army with the support of the patriarchs and elders of their respective clans, all for the sake of fighting for a future for themselves and for the glory of their own clans. Almost every one of them had come with the hopes of their tribes. This made them more eager than anyone else to enter the battlefield and receive better praise. This was also the reason why Yang Chendong had abandoned the gradually forming Far Eastern Army and instead formed this foreign division. It was important to emphasize that the Far Eastern Army was left behind in the Far East for this war. After nearly a year, Chun Bo had finally been reinstated and became the commander of the Far Eastern Army. They were left behind to defend the 5 cities and at the same time to supervise the civilians under their rule to not cause trouble, which would allow them to work better. According to Yang Chendong's request, there had to be a village with a population of more than 1,000 people within 200 li of each city. In his mind, it was impossible to rely on only 5 cities to revitalize the entire Far East. The role of the cities was to lead the way, and those villages were the points. In order to make the entire Far East prosperous, there had to be enough people. Speaking of which, the 20,000 foreign troops had performed very well along the way. It was as if they knew their identities and were afraid that they would be looked down upon. They were doing their best to perform at every moment and strive to show their best side so that the great Ming dynasty's martial South King, the Grassland's Heavenly Khan, would take a good look at them. Maybe one day their performance would be good enough to catch his eye. Then, they would walk to the peak of their lives. The result of performing well was that the speed of the army increased. The journey that was originally scheduled to take nearly 2 months was completed in 1 month, which was twice as fast. It was the end of April, and the mountains in sight were covered in a layer of light green. The trees had begun a new cycle of growth, and the grass had also sprouted and stubbornly pulled out of the soil. Great Raven City. The weather continued to warm up, causing the city to emit a trace of vitality. The city gates opened and the bazaar opened. Many merchants walked into the city. Many commoners also began to barter in the most primitive way. Ahuli called himself the Khan of Zhongxing, and the Great Raven City was the main power under his rule. With the city as the center, the area that stretched out for 500 li was his territory. His general, Shikai was an unstoppable enemy. Relying on this general, Ahuli used nearly 10 years to become the overlord of this area, with 20,000 cavalry under his command. To be able to command 20,000 elite soldiers in Siberia, where the weather was harsh, was enough to make Ahuli feel proud. As such, in this place, he was like a god, and his words were like an imperial edict. No one dared to go against him. Ahuli could be considered an anomaly among the Mongol Khans. He was not like the others who only knew how to kill and think of ways to rob when they ran out of things. He was someone who placed great importance on production and construction. For example, the Great Crow City under his rule had very good public security. Not only did the soldiers not offend the common people, even the merchants who passed by would happily let them pass as long as they paid the taxes according to the area. The safety of the merchants within a radius of 500 miles was guaranteed. As such, the Great Raven City was relatively prosperous, and many nearby tribes even chose to live in the city after understanding the situation. This made the Great Raven City one of the most prosperous cities in the area. Whenever Ahuli walked out of his residence and saw the bustling scene in the city, he would smile and be in a good mood. Great Khan, the city is like this because of you. As expected of the Son of the Heavens, you love the people like your own children. You should let us learn from you and imitate you. Seeing that Ahuli was in a good mood, Shikai quickly flattered him with a look of worship. Ha ha! Ahuli, who was praised like this, laughed out loud and said humbly, "This is not enough. This Khan is thinking whether or not we can lower the taxes for the people. They have suffered too much, Sai." When he heard that the taxes would be reduced, Cycle's expression changed, and his eyes flashed with an inexplicable anger. If it was in the past, he would definitely speak up to stop it. Although the taxes in the Great Raven City were a bit high, reaching 5% of the taxes, they protected the people. However, they had ensured the safety of the people. This was something that could not be bought with money in this chaotic world. Speaking of which, this was not the first time Ahuli lowered the taxes. Originally, it was 7% of the taxes. Every time it was lowered, Cecil would object. If this went on, it wouldn't be long before the food in the city's storehouse would dwindle. Wouldn't it be dangerous if a war broke out? This time, Shikai Air did not speak up to stop it. He only hesitated for a moment before saying, "This is the Great Khan's action of caring for the people. It is admirable." General, you don't object? Originally, he was already prepared to give up if Shikai Air opposed it. In fact, this time, he didn't have any hopes of passing this resolution. He was just testing the waters, and he would continue to raise it. Once he raised it enough times, it wouldn't be good for Cecil to keep opposing it. As long as Cecil agreed once, the taxes would naturally be reduced. It was because he was prepared for a long battle that Shikai Air did not object, which made Ahuli feel a bit uncomfortable. Very quickly, when he saw that no one objected, he immediately seized the opportunity and said, "Since the general agrees, then this matter is settled. We will lower the taxes by 10%. In the future, 4% of the taxes will be enough." "All right, the Great Khan will make the decision." Shikai Air replied without any change in expression. The matter of lowering the taxes was actually settled so easily. Ahuli was in a good mood and returned to his residence with a group of bodyguards. Zyker also rode back to his residence. Not long after he returned, another captain, Bushi, walked into the study and saw General Zyker sitting in his chair like a golden blade. The two sat facing each other. When there was no third person in the study, Shikai Air opened his mouth. "Brother Bushi, did you know? The Great Khan lowered the taxes again." "What?" Bushi, who was about to pass the cup of horse milk to his mouth, heard this, and his expression changed. He then said with some agitation, "It's still going to be lowered? There are very few merchants in the city, and we don't take care of the land like the Han people. If the taxes are lowered, what will our army eat?" It was no wonder Bushi was so agitated. Although 5% of the taxes in the Great Crow City looked very high, but in reality, there were very few people who could actually pay the taxes. In ancient times, taxes were mainly collected from merchants and farmers. The Mongols were not good at farming, and only merchants paid the taxes. However, there were only a few merchants in the city. If they relied on them, it was impossible to feed the 30,000 cavalry. Now that the taxes were lowered, did they want the soldiers to patrol with empty stomachs? Chapter 1400. Ahuli's idea was good, and he was learning the Han's way of governing a country. However, the problem was that this was Siberia, which was sparsely populated. It was not a bustling city where the Han lived. There were no fertile fields here, unlike the Han's land, which was filled with the fragrance of rice and flowers. This was the so-called Handan learning to walk. In the end, he would even forget how he walked. Ahuli seemed to be walking on that path, which naturally attracted Shikai's dissatisfaction. Another general, Bushi, also had a headache when he heard his decision. What's wrong with the Great Khan? Why isn't Brother Shikai persuading him? Bushi's face was filled with confusion. Normally, this kind of thing had happened before, but most of them had been persuaded, unless it was mentioned many times and it was not easy to stop them. However, this seemed to be the first time he mentioned it. How can we persuade him? Can we persuade him this time? But can we persuade him next time? How is he still a Great Khan? He's clearly learning from the Han. If this goes on, I'm afraid that the soldiers won't even be able to afford food and clothing. How can we fight then? If someone makes a move on us, how can we guard against it? Shikai's face was filled with anger. He even forgot the rules and began to criticize the Great Khan. In this regard, Bushi immediately shut his mouth. The other party spoke without thinking in a fit of anger. He could not make such a mistake. Bushi did not speak again, which made Shikai, who was testing him, somewhat dissatisfied. What? I've already passed the words over. Why don't you say something? Why are you pretending to be mute? Shikai wanted to see Bushi's opinion because he already had thoughts of rebelling. During the new year, Houlihan sent someone to find him in private and expressed that he was willing to help him become the Khan of the Great Raven City. Houlihan naturally did this because he was threatened by Ahuli. As the security of the Great Raven City became better and better, and the citizens responded positively, the surrounding powers were naturally affected. Just like Houlihan's Wuxi City, at least 1,000 households had already left the city, heading for Ahu's Great Wuxi City. Just based on this point, he cannot ignore it. If it wasn't for the fact that he had suffered a huge loss in the battle with the 5-star army and couldn't use force to solve the problem, he would have already led his troops over. Since he could not send out his troops, Houlihan thought of another method, which was to let someone else be the Great Khan and replace him. As long as the Great Crow City's policy towards the commoners changed, it would not attract other commoners. This way, the threat to him would not exist. With this thought in mind, the special envoy sent out by Houlihan found the most likely candidate to replace him, General Sakir, and explained his thoughts. He even offered 10,000 taels of silver and promised to send over 1,000 cows and sheep as a congratulatory gift after the matter was settled. This naturally made Cicero overjoyed. He didn't really care about these things. What he liked was Houlihan's attitude towards him. This was the Great Khan with the greatest influence in Siberia. Even he thought highly of him and supported him. Didn't that mean that he was the most capable person who should be in the top position? It was also from then on that Cicero had the idea of seizing the position. During this period of time, he had also talked to some of his trusted subordinates and tactfully probed them. He really managed to persuade a few Kiliarchs to stand on his side. Cicero, who was growing more and more powerful, saw hope. This time, he took this opportunity to find Bushi. He was also testing the other party. The entire Great Crow City only had 20,000 cavalry. The two of them each controlled 10,000 troops. If he could obtain this person's support, he would succeed. However, this time, Bushi did not say anything. This made Cycle unhappy, but he couldn't show it on his face. Not only that, he could not give up. He knew that once he opened his mouth, there had to be an outcome. Otherwise, it would be too disadvantageous for him. Fortunately, this Bushi had a fatal flaw, which was that he liked women very much. This general's wealth was basically all used on this path. Coincidentally, Cicero had 2 clean girls in his hands. He had originally planned to leave them for himself, but ever since he became ambitious, he prepared to give them to his trusted subordinates to win people's hearts. This time, in order to obtain Bushi's support, he decided to give up his capital. Looking at Bushi, who did not say anything, Cicero laughed and said casually, "Okay, then let's not talk about annoying things. Tonight, come to my residence to drink. You know, I have a pair of White Russian oviparous sisters. Tonight, this general wants to take them into my room. Such a big matter I should share with my friends. Drinking big bowls and eating big pieces of meat, isn't that great?" Finally, he stopped talking about the Great Khan. Bushi let out a sigh of relief. He was not a fool, so he could naturally sense Shikai's disloyal heart. Just now, this person had actually talked about the Great Khan. He had already thought about it. After a while, he would go talk to the Great Khan and do his duty as a subject. Not mentioning the official matter, Bushi laughed and said, "That's good. Since that's the case, I will definitely visit Brother Shi's residence tonight." "Ha, good. Since that's the case, let's go now. We can enjoy the White Russian dance. It's quite interesting compared to us Mongolian women." Cicero laughed loudly and stood up to walk to Bushi's side, looking like he wanted to go with him. He was being watched. Considering that if he did not go now, he might attract Cicero's suspicion, Bushi could only agree and said, "Since that's the case, please, please." Cicero laughed loudly. When he turned around, he raised his eyebrows and a vicious look flashed in his eyes. He had already made up his mind. Tonight, he would have a showdown with Bushi. If the other party was tactful, then everything would be fine. If the plan did not work, then he could only kill the other party. Cicero's residence. When he returned to the courtyard, the servants began to prepare the banquet. Cicero accompanied him the entire time and did not leave his side at all. This made Bushi unable to find an excuse to go. He had no choice but to calm down and put his worries aside for the time being. Two young girls about 1.7 meters tall with graceful figures and incomparably white skin appeared on the stage. As two girls who had been seriously trained, their dance steps were graceful. Wearing almost transparent sand clothes, they were graceful and graceful. Every movement was filled with flirtatious charm. In just a short while, the lustful Bushi's eyes were fixed on the two girls. He did not move even half a step. Seeing Bushi's devilish appearance, Cicero's eyes flashed with disdain. He then continued to urge him to drink. Not long after, the two girls also walked down the stage. One on the left and one on the right, they nestled beside Bushi. Cup after cup of horse milk wine was poured into their mouths. For a moment, he did not know how much he had drunk. After a moment of dizziness, he lost consciousness. When he woke up again, it was already the middle of the night. Shaking his somewhat dizzy head, he began to observe his surroundings. What entered his eyes was four spotlessly white, jade-like arms placed in front of his chest. Upon closer inspection, who else could they be but the twin Russian sisters? Bang! Bushi sat up, followed by two screams. Then, the candles in the room were lit. One by one, the guards of the mansion walked into the bedroom. Their fierce eyes were fixed on the half-naked Bushi, who was still a loss of what to do. What is this? Before Bushi could ask his question, footsteps sounded again. Another set of footsteps came from outside the door. Then, Cyril walked in, accompanied by a few bodyguards. When his eyes met Tracy's, and he saw the scene in the bedroom, his eyes widened. He shouted sternly, "What's going on?" This general only went to the army to deal with some urgent military matters. How could something like this happen? General Bushi drank too much wine. After you left, he pestered the two girls and chased us out. He even said that this was the general's order and we did not dare to disobey. But I never thought that General Bushi would do such a despicable thing. We really didn't expect this. Now that we have made a big mistake, please punish us, General. After the four guards who had entered the bedroom first finished speaking, they knelt on the ground with a plop. What? There is such a thing? You all deserve to die. Men. Hearing this, the furious Cicero's face changed. He pointed at the four guards and said, "Dereliction of duty. Take them away and give each of them 30 strokes of the military rod." Yes. The personal guards behind Cicero acknowledged and went forward to drag the four kneeling personal guards away. Soon after, everyone walked out of the bedroom. Soon after, miserable screams rang out in the courtyard. Every time there was a sound, Bushi, who was still half-naked, would frown. Then, he looked at the two Russian women lying on the side, who had already woken up. Looking at their fearful eyes, his heart was filled with bitterness. At this moment, if he still did not know that he had been set up, then he would not be worthy of being a 10,000-man commander. He did not believe that he would do such a stupid thing after drinking too much. It was true that he was lustful, but his alcohol tolerance was not bad. It was not to the extent that he could not control his body just because he drank in someone else's house. The reason why such a thing happened must be because there was something wrong with the wine. He was afraid that there was medicine there. He should have been carried here while he was unconscious. Needless to say, the mastermind behind all of this was Cicero. It seemed that when he showed his dissatisfaction with the Great Khan during the day, he did not receive a reply. He had misgivings and used all kinds of despicable methods. Now that he had something on him, it was time to talk about the conditions. Cicero was also staring at Bushi. He had to admit that his method was a bit too straightforward. However, he was not a smart person. It was not easy for him to think of such a method. The most important thing was that it was effective. With Ahuli's temperament, he had already given a strict order in the Great Crow City to prohibit any bullying of men and women. If it was discovered, regardless of the identity of the offender, they would be severely punished. In addition, Bushi's mouth was not good when it came to women. As long as this matter was reported to the Great Khan, it would be inevitable. After that, it was only natural that he would be stripped of his status as a major. Chapter 1401. In other words, at this time, Zyker had already grasped Bushi's lifeline. Next, it would depend on whether the other party cooperated with him. If he didn't, he could only report this matter. Without a helper, he couldn't have another opponent. AI. Bushi suddenly opened his mouth. First, he let out a long sigh, then said with some bitterness, "Brother Shi, if you have something to say, just say it. Why do you have to beat around the bush? Don't you have a problem with the Great Khan? What do you want to do? Brother will cooperate with you." In this short period of time, Bushi also understood that he was now a fish on the chopping block. If he didn't cooperate, he would lose his position and be severely punished. If a person who was used to being a general suddenly lost his military power, what was the difference between him and a dead man? Originally, he was still thinking about how to persuade Bushi. If the other party refused to comply, would he really report it to the Great Khan? If this person saw the Great Khan and told the whole story, although the Great Khan might not believe it, the Great Khan would definitely be on guard against him. In this way, it wouldn't be a good thing for his plan. Unexpectedly, when he was still thinking about what to do next, the other party had already opened his mouth and admitted defeat. Zyker naturally wasn't worried that Bushi would lie to him. Just now, not only him, but also the 8 guards had witnessed everything. It was far from something that Bushi could just pull up his pants and deny. Since that was the case, didn't it mean that his plan had succeeded? The happy Zyker's face was no longer angry. Instead, he laughed. "Ha ha, Brother Bushi is really a smart person. Since that's the case, let's not beat around the bush in front of a straightforward person. I'll be frank with you. What the Great Khan has done is in conflict with our Mongolian traditions in too many ways. Since the beginning of our ancestors, we've been robbing and robbing people for a living. We've never done anything like business or governing a city. You still want to ask for so many rules and regulations? Do you really think you're a saint or a gentleman? If this goes on, the people will be happy, but the warriors won't even be able to eat. Isn't this putting the cart before the horse?" First, he complained a lot, acting like a whore who still wanted to establish a monument to her chastity. He talked about many of the Great Khan's problems. Then his tone changed, and he said righteously, "For the future of the Mongolian warriors, this general has decided to remonstrate with the Great Khan. It's just that my strength alone is meager, so I need Brother Bushi's help." Finally, the dagger, Bushi secretly said in his heart, "This is really a traitor." Pretending to be shocked, Bushi said, "Brother Shi, if this matter doesn't succeed, it will be a death sentence." "What? Is Brother Bu still afraid? What kind of thing do you not dare to do?" As he spoke, he glanced sideways at the 2 Caucasian twin sisters who were still lying on the bed, their clothes slightly disheveled. These 2 women were evidence. Before the matter was settled, it was better not to touch the scene. He had already checked. These 2 women did not know Mongolian, so he could say anything in front of them without worry. He cursed in his heart. He was basically drugged and sent here. He didn't even touch a single hair on these 2 women. Wasn't it too unfair to threaten him with this? Naturally, this was just a thought in his heart. Bushi did not dare to question it, because if this matter was known by the Great Khan, he was afraid that no one would listen to his side of the story. Seeing that Bushi did not immediately object and was thinking about it, Zyker was overjoyed. He quickly said, "Besides, it's not like I didn't make any preparations. There are already several Kiliarchs in the army who have agreed to work for me. Even one of the Great Khan's personal guards is already one of my men. Believe me, as long as you and I work together, we will succeed." Finally showing his trump card, Bushi sighed in his heart. He knew that if he had heard all these things, then he would definitely not have the chance to object now. In other words, he would either rebel with Shikir or he would die. "Brother Bushi, as long as you help me succeed, you will be second only to one person and above millions of people. Not only will I give you these 2 sisters, as long as you take a fancy to any woman in the city, you can capture them and bring them home. Wouldn't that be great?" Zyker continued to raise the price. He had already investigated. This lecherous man often lingered in the city's brothels, especially the few pretty girls that he had visited several times. If it was not for the fact that the other party was a virgin and could not be forced, he would have already married her as a concubine. As long as Ahuri was still the great Khan, he would not be able to carry out this plan. Thus, overthrowing Ahuri would most likely be beneficial to Bushi. After promising many benefits, the light in Bushi's eyes grew brighter and brighter. When he saw the white Russian sisters from the corner of his eyes, his instincts won over his rationality. He finally nodded and said, "In that case, Bushi is willing to follow Brother Zyker's lead." "Oh, how good, brother. Don't worry. Once I become the great Khan, I will definitely not treat you unfairly. At that time, we will jointly control the Great Crow City and share wealth, haha." Finally achieving his wish, Zyker's face was filled with joy. The cooperation had been reached. According to Zyker's intention, Bushi would stay the night here. This time, he guaranteed that no one would disturb them. However, how could Bushi, who had something on his mind, sleep? He had to go back and call for his trusted subordinates to work with him. Zyker also knew that the important matter was more important, so he nodded and praised, "Good. In that case, you can go back and prepare. Don't worry, these sisters will definitely be left for General Bushi." "In that case, many thanks," Bushi said indifferently. Once the matter was settled, he would not only have this pair of sisters by his side. There would only be more women serving him. At that time, wouldn't it be beautiful every night? Bushi finally put on his clothes and said goodbye to Zyker. After adding a large helping hand, Zyker was in a good mood. He immediately headed to the back of the residence. Although the sisters in front of him were not bad-looking, he had already promised Bushi and would not go back on his word. Zyker left. Before he left, he told the two women to have a good night's sleep and instructed the guards not to disturb them. However, what he did not know was that right after he left, the elder sister quickly got up and put on a jacket. Then, she took out a note that she had prepared beforehand and wrote something on it. About an hour later, the soft meowing of a cat could be heard from outside the window. After 3 consecutive beeps, the window of the room opened from the inside. A slender arm stretched out, and a note was thrown out of the window. A black shadow came as promised. He picked up the note and quickly left. In the pitch-black night, he was like a ghost, coming and going in a hurry. No one noticed or thought that this pair of Caucasian oviparous sisters had another identity. They were outside agents of Yang Xie's intelligence department. Yang Xie's intelligence department was mainly made up of 2 major parts. One was the earliest security bureau, and the other was the Central Intelligence Bureau, which was established later. The former followed Yang San's lead and was mostly men. The latter was led by Madame Sumaner and was mostly women. This way, they could ensure that there were few blind spots in the information, and they could also supervise each other. This pair of Caucasian oviparous sisters were outside agents of the Central Intelligence Bureau. Everywhere they went, developing young and beautiful women had long been something that the Central Intelligence Bureau's core personnel had to do. At first glance, these weak women did not seem to be of much use. However, when their natural beauty and good looks were put to use, they could obtain information that men could not obtain even if they worked hard for a long time. Just like the information this time, it was obtained so easily and without any effort. Originally, the 2 women were already prepared to counterattack. In order to preserve their innocence, no matter who the man in front of them was, whether it was Si Qian or Busi, the 2 women would use their newly learned joint killing technique to kill them. If they were completely unprepared, and if they intentionally got the other party drunk, they would have at least a 60% chance of success. No matter what they did, not only would they preserve their innocence, they would also make a great contribution. They would eliminate a threatening opponent for the 5-star army. They never thought that the development of the situation would be so dramatic. Before the 2 women could take the risk, they received such important information. How could they not understand Mongolian? They were just pretending that they did not understand. Now, they had indeed made a great contribution. The news of the 2 women was sent out by a guard in charge of their safety. It did not take long for it to reach Yang Chendong's hands. After reading the information, Yang Chendong pondered for a moment, then raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "The CIA has made a great contribution this time and should be rewarded. I never thought that Ahuri would be so different from the other Mongolian Khans. This is a person who wholeheartedly wants to work for the people. Try to win him over." "Young master, I understand. I will arrange it now." Beta Persei could be said to be the person who understood Yang Chendong's thoughts the most, so she immediately agreed. "Well, you must find a way to protect Ahuri's life. This matter can be done by the Security Bureau in cooperation with the CIA." Yang Chendong certainly knew that the two intelligence departments had the intention to compete with each other. When there was a comparison, they would be more motivated to work together. But sometimes, it was inevitable that there would be some constraints under the competition. This time, he directly pointed out the relationship between the two because he did not want to see the problem arise from the insiders. "I will give a stern warning to some people." Beta Persei nodded heavily. When he walked to the telegraph office, he thought for a moment and sent a telegram to his brother Yang San, asking him to restrain his subordinates. This time, the CIA's team leader was in charge. In the Great Raven City, whether it was Cecil or General Bushi, they were making all kinds of preparations. They were constantly calling their generals to meet and prepare for the food uprising. Ahuri, as their great Khan, was completely unaware of all this. He still focused on the people's livelihood. Chapter 1402. Ahuli had a tough life. His mother had died in childbirth when he was born, and his father had died in a battle between the tribes when he was not even 3 years old. He had practically begged for food since he was young, and had seen countless hardships. At that time, the happiest thing was that he could have a safe place to stay and eat his fill. Perhaps because he had suffered too much since he was young. After Ahuli became famous, he did not want the people under his rule to suffer like that. Thus, he began to care about the people. Although he did not have a foundation and did not know how to farm, and did not do many things well, the good governance of the Great Crow City still attracted the attention of many people. When he saw the number of people in the city increasing, Ahuli's eyes would always flash with excitement. No matter what, he had provided a safe, living environment for everyone. Just this point alone was a great contribution. A great Khan who did not pay attention to the army under him, but to see how the ordinary people were doing, it had to be said that it was a kind of weirdo. His every action had attracted the dissatisfaction of some people in the army, and his situation had become dangerous. However, no one knew the true purpose of Chun Huli's actions. Just like now, what he had in his hands was the list of recruits who had signed up to join the army. As a great Khan, he had seriously looked for a Han Shiozai to teach him how to read. Just from this point alone, it could be seen that he was more ambitious than other Mongol great Khans. There were more than 400 people on this list, and they were all weak Mongol and White Russian tribesmen who had just arrived at the Great Crow City. They were grateful that Ahuli had brought them a safe living environment, so they wanted to join the army to repay his kindness. This is the result. Looking at this list, Ahuli's face was filled with excitement, and when he spoke, his voice trembled slightly. How could someone as smart as him not know that his actions had already caused some people to dislike him? However, he didn't say anything because he knew very well that he was going to walk a completely different path from the other Mongol Khans. Since they were different, it was natural that they would be met with some confusion and even criticism. However, once he succeeded, the rewards would be great. Before he succeeded, all he needed to do was continue to persevere and withstand all the pressure. Fortunately, the results were not bad. Although he had been misunderstood for a few years, the results were finally showing. More than 400 people joined the army today. If this continued, wouldn't it be easy for him to achieve his goal of expanding the army? At that time, when he had enough troops, who in the Siberian region would be his match? Considering the geographical environment, the lack of population was the biggest obstacle to Ahuli's development. For example, wasn't the reason why people called him the most powerful great Khan in Wuxi was because he had 30,000 soldiers, far more than Ahuli's 20,000 soldiers? And if there was a day when his military strength reached 30,000, he would have the qualifications to compete with them. At that time, would he still be far from the position of the biggest Khan in this region? Ahuli's hard work finally bore fruit, and he saw hope. Ahuli was overjoyed and wanted to share the results with others. He ordered his bodyguards to summon Sikor and Bushi. He wanted to announce the results in front of everyone and let his two important subordinates know how powerful he was as the great Khan. Ahuli was still thinking about how the two highly regarded generals would be as excited as he was once they knew that there were so many new recruits joining the army. However, all of a sudden, the sound of battle cries came from outside. Following that, his personal guard captain ran to him with a panicked expression. He knelt down and said, "Great Khan, something bad has happened. General Sikor and Bushi have brought people to surround our residence. They are now bringing people to kill us." "What? What's going on?" Ahuli was shocked, and his eyes were as big as bells. He reached out and grabbed the captain's collar as he shouted, This should be because they want to rebel." The captain of the bodyguards replied with a pale face. He had heard some rumors before, saying that the great Khan didn't do his job properly and helped the people instead of the soldiers. He had reminded the great Khan many times about this, but the great Khan didn't take it to heart. Ahuli loosened his grip and murmured, "Rebellion? Rebellion? Why are they here? They don't know this Khan's good intentions." Seeing that the great Khan was still lamenting, the captain couldn't help but say anxiously, "Please lead us to a bloody path. We are willing to use our lives to protect the great Khan." "No need." In the blink of an eye, Ahuli had recovered his previous calmness. He waved his hand and said confidently, "Since they have already surrounded our courtyard, how can it be so easy to break out? Come, follow this Khan. I want to ask the two generals, where did this Khan go wrong?" Since there was no escape, it was better to face it calmly. After saying this, Ahuli strode out. Outside the courtyard, there were already more than 20 corpses lying on the ground. Among them were Ahuli's personal guards, as well as the personal guards brought by Shikai and Busi. Since the matter was settled, the two of them led a group of reliable personal guards to kill their way over. As long as Ahuli was dead, there would be no obstacles in their way to take over the military. "Stop!" Ahuli walked out of the inner courtyard. When he arrived at the courtyard, he shouted, separating the two sides of personal guards. No matter what, he had been the great Khan for several years, and his aura was still quite impressive. Taking advantage of the temporary pause in the fighting, he strode to the battlefield and pointed with his right hand. "Where are Shikai and Busi? You even dare to rebel? Don't tell me you don't even have the courage to show your face?" After all, he had been the great Khan for so many years. Ahuli's strong body trembled, and the entire place fell silent. Everyone involuntarily put down their weapons. Even Shikai and Busi, who were hiding behind the personal guards, could only take the initiative to stand out. At this moment, they definitely wouldn't show the slightest bit of fear. If even they were afraid, how would the soldiers below react? "Are you finally not going to be a coward?" Seeing that his two most trusted subordinates had finally walked out, Ahuli asked with a furious expression. He didn't think he had mistreated these two, especially Shikai. Back then, he had even saved Shikai's life. Why did he want to rebel now? Although Shikai was very talkative when he talked about Ahuli behind Ahuli's back, he immediately became mute in front of the real person. He was used to being inferior to others, and on top of that, Ahuli was his savior. He didn't have much confidence. Shikai stood out with a frown on his face, not saying a word. Busi, on the other hand, was a bit unhappy. "What? You're admitting defeat when it's time for real? What about me? You two have a good relationship. Perhaps even if the rebellion fails, I can't really kill you." "But I can't." Busi admitted that his relationship with Ahuli wasn't bad, but it wasn't so good that he could ignore everything. Thus, he had no other choice at this moment. "Ahuli, there's no need for you to be hypocritical here. You want us all to work for you, but you only have the lowliest commoners in your eyes. May I ask if you're a qualified great Khan?" He was afraid that his momentum would weaken, and he was also afraid that Shikai would shake the morale of the troops causing everything to go to waste. He had no choice but to speak up. When Ahuli heard Busi's question, he was infuriated. Everything that this person had now was given to him by him. It was hateful that he didn't know how to repay his kindness. Now, he actually dared to call him by his name. He really wanted a rebel. After thinking about it, he pointed at Yoshi and said, "Shikai, did you listen to the slanderous words of this despicable person?" At this moment, Shikai also came back to his senses. He thought that once he became the Great Khan, everything here would be his. He wouldn't have to look at other people's faces anymore. At this moment, his expression changed from hesitation to determination. The brave Ahuli of the past is already dead. The current you is not worthy of the position of Great Khan. Stretching out his finger, Zyker pointed at Ahuli, his eyes filled with determination. After finally saying those words, Cycle felt his whole body relax a lot, as if a huge rock that was pressing down on him had suddenly been removed. Good. Ahuli staggered. Even the person he trusted the most, the person who had saved his life, was rebelling against him. This was really his failure as a person. Thinking about how he had struggled for half his life, only to be betrayed by his friends and family, Ahuli couldn't help but laugh at the sky. Ha, you're just a group of short-sighted, despicable people. You don't understand this Khan's painstaking efforts. Ahuli really had a lot to say. From a poor boy with no background to the current position of Khan of a tribe, he had experienced too much and seen too much. Therefore, he had a lot of ideas of his own. In his opinion, Mongolia should not be nomadic. At the very least, it should enter a half-pastoral and half-agricultural state. They had to ensure that they had production. This wasn't just a sign of progress. More importantly, plundering wasn't the way to strengthen oneself. Just like in the past dynasties, they mainly looted and plundered. Many times, they even treated the land of China as their own back garden, giving people the feeling that they had no money and no food. Just by walking around here, they would have everything. It seemed like they had endless glory, but who knew about their own suffering? If it wasn't for the fact that they had no food and couldn't survive, why would they do something like plundering that could cost them their lives? Not to mention, whenever a heroic ruler appeared in China, they would send troops to the grasslands to train. It was as if only by defeating them could they prove the strength and wisdom of the Han people. Chapter 1403. For this reason, sometimes the location of the loot would change. Wasn't this all because he didn't care about production and didn't understand construction and management? Unfortunately, not many people could understand such a simple principle, and no one thought of changing it. Now, he decided to make some changes. If he succeeded, it would be equivalent to finding another way for the Mongols to survive other than being nomads. After a few years, he had accumulated some experience and laid a good foundation for the people. If he continued, things would definitely get better and better. If his subordinates rebelled, wouldn't everything be for naught? He didn't want to hand over his achievements just like that, nor did he want his efforts to go to waste. More than that, he wanted to prove that he was still brave and good at fighting. He stretched out his hand and said, "Men, bring me this Khan's mace." Ahuli himself had boundless strength. It was precisely because of this that he was able to defeat countless opponents and become the current Khan. Although he had mainly focused on building the city in the past few years, he still had his own foundation. He believed that he would have no problem dealing with Cycle and Busi working together. He stretched out his arm, but it was not the huge mace that responded to him. On the contrary, a machete suddenly came slashing at him. With a gust of wind, Ahuli instinctively moved his body to the side. It was this one step that saved his life, but there was already a bright red wound under his ribs. It could be imagined that if he hadn't dodged in time, his life would have been taken away just now. After being slashed by the scimitar, Ahuli, who was already injured, immediately turned around and saw his bodyguard captain staring at him with wide eyes and a nervous expression. He angrily stretched out his arm and pointed at him. "Even you are rebelling against this Khan?" "No." This sudden scene and this sudden accusation stunned the other bodyguards at first, but then they came back to their senses. In particular, the captain of the bodyguards, who was not far away, directly slashed his scimitar across the neck of the captain. Immediately, blood splashed high into the air, and the captain fell to the ground with a terrified expression, dead. After the captain killed the captain, he led a group of bodyguards in front of a huli and shouted, "We pledge our lives to follow the Great Khan." Okay, Ahuli smiled with relief. He was not a complete failure as a person. With a sigh, he reached out and took the mace handed to him by another woman. Then, he turned to look at CKE and Percy and said, "Come, let's fight. I want to see who is the true barter of the grasslands. He's already injured. He won't be able to hold on for much longer. Let's go together." Seeing that Ahuli was still so heroic, Cicero's expression couldn't help but change. But now that things had come to this, it was either you die or I die. He no longer had a choice. After he said that to Bushi, the two of them stepped forward together and surrounded Ahuli from both sides. The three main generals fought together, and the bodyguards below also began to fall into chaos. In a short period of time, the courtyard was filled with the sounds of weapons clashing. From time to time, there would be Mongolian warriors falling to the ground. The smell of blood quickly filled the small courtyard, making people want to vomit. Ahuli's awe-inspiring aura was not any less than before. He waved the 38-gene mace in his hand and repeatedly forced Percy to retreat to the side. If not for Cicero saving him a few times, he would have already been smashed under the mace. Ha ha ha! Let's see if this Khan is heroic. Cough cough. Ahuli, who had just shouted, could not help but cough a few times. In the end, because of the wound, he had lost too much blood and had damaged his foundation. Now that he was bleeding profusely, if this continued, he would not be able to hold on for much longer. When Cicero saw Ahuli's performance, he could not help but be happy and said, "He's almost done. Let's hold on for a bit longer." Okay. Percy looked at the large hole in his scimitar caused by the collision with the mace and gritted his teeth as he replied. After all, they had the advantage in numbers and were the ones who initiated the attack. After 15 minutes, most of Ahuli's bodyguards were dead. Even Ahuli himself had lost too much blood and was showing signs of weakness. Whether it was his strength or reflexes, he was not even a quarter of his usual strength. Cicero saw the changes in Ahuli, and his eyes shone brightly. He could almost see the throne of the Great Khan in front of him. He could almost see the moment when thousands of people would submit to him. Is this Khan really going to die here? Ahuli's face was full of grievance and unwillingness. When he felt that the strength in his body was about to be sucked dry, he knew his end. At this moment, he was filled with regret. Could it be that he was wrong? Could it be that the Mongolian warriors were destined to only have one path? Boom! Just when everyone was thinking about different things, a huge explosion suddenly sounded out. A large part of the walls of the courtyard collapsed due to the explosion, revealing a temporary path for horses to pass through. Amidst the huge explosion, the two sides who were fighting in the courtyard could not help but stop. Everyone could not understand what was going on. Why would there be an explosion? Could it be that it was caused by lightning? Great Khan, quickly leave with us. Just when everyone was still in a daze, a dozen men dressed in ordinary Mongolian clothing rushed in through the gap. They quickly walked to the injured Ahuli and shouted, "You are." Seeing that the newcomers were unfamiliar and that he could not figure out their identities, Ahu revealed a nervous expression. Great Khan, quickly leave. The commotion here will attract more people. If you don't leave now, it will be too late. One of the men said hurriedly, then nodded to the people behind him. One of them walked out and pulled over a strong horse, then helped Ahuli onto the horse. The other Mongolian people were holding Big Dipper crossbows. With a few shots, they forced back Shikai and Bushi, who wanted to charge forward. Then, under everyone's gaze, they turned around and left. General, we have to chase after them. Don't let them escape. Bushi shouted anxiously, intending to chase after them. Let them go. Ahuli is injured and has lost so much blood. It will be difficult for him to survive. It is only a beast king that is about to die. He is no longer a threat to us. There are more important things waiting for us to do. Shikai shook his head. He was very wary of the big dipper crossbows in the hands of those Mongolian people. He had a feeling that they did not intend to kill him. Otherwise, he would be dead by now. Although he was curious about the other party's background and why they appeared at such a crucial time, he still did not have enough control over the army. There were still many loyal followers of Ahuli. Now that he had to deal with them, he had no choice but to let Ahuli leave with his injuries. Ahuli escaped. He only brought along 2 bodyguards who were also injured. Halfway through, he fainted due to excessive blood loss. He did not even have the chance to ask who saved him. This is caused by excessive blood loss. Take him to a safe place. Check his blood type and prepare to transfuse. Leader Wang Guang examined one of the wounds and made a decision after pulling up Ahuli's eyelids. Wang Guang, the leader of the Security Bureau's operations in Siberia, was ordered by the CIA's operations leader, Meng Li, to save Ahuli. The news was reported to Meng Li by the Caucasian oviparous sisters, which gave the CIA the upper hand. It was not easy for Wang Guang to receive the mission to save Ahuli. No matter what, he had to complete it well. Otherwise, he would really lose out to those women in the CIA. Not long after Ahuli left, the Inner Mongolian soldiers who heard the explosion rushed over. Then, Cycle said that the Khan had been attacked and was killed by the explosion. Now, he was in charge of the city, with the support of Busi and the other Kiliarchs. Although there were still some Kiliarchs who did not understand, without Ahuli's leadership, they could only behave for the time being. Before seeing Ahuli's corpse and hearing the news of his death, Cycle was still very cautious. He did not immediately change the policies in the Great Crow City. It looked like it was still the same as before. The only difference was that there were more Mongolian soldiers patrolling the streets. Although the explosion that day was sudden, Ahuli was still an extremely strict general. After the explosion, the soldiers guarding the city closed the 4 cities. Before confirming that Ahuli had not left the city, Cycle increased the intensity of the search. Only when he saw Ahuli's corpse would he be at ease to ascend the throne and do what he wanted to do. Although the city gates were closed and no one could leave the city without a warrant, sending out a telegram did not require the permission of the soldiers guarding the city. The telecommunications department received the telegram from the intelligence department on time. After knowing that Ahuli had been saved and that he would be able to get out of bed in about 3 days, Yang Shindong gave the order that the army must arrive at the Great Crow City on time within 3 days. At that time, he would come to the center and coordinate with the outside. No one knew about the arrival of the 5-star army. This was due to their knowledge of the weather. Before the snow melted, it was not suitable to mobilize an army. Not to mention, the 5-star army's scouting methods were not something normal Mongolian scouts could compare to. With their telescopes, as long as they were careful, it would not be hard to discover the enemy's cavalry. Along the way, the 5-star army scouts had captured and killed close to 50 Mongolian scouts. Finally, on the 3rd day, they arrived 5 li outside of the Great Crow City. Following Yang Qindong's orders, the army hid and rested. They would wait for orders to attack tomorrow. At this time, within the city, Cycle, who did not know anything about the outside world, was frowning and looking at General Busi. It had been 7 days since the start of the search. According to the soldiers, they had already turned the Great Crow City upside down. However, there was still no news of Ahuli. This made them both worried and happy. Chapter 1404. They were happy because so much time had passed. With the amount of blood Ahuri had lost, he must have died a long time ago. What he was worried about was that anything could happen before they saw Ahuli's body. They were too focused on Ahuri's matter. No one cared about the fact that the scouts outside the city had not contacted them for a few days. Perhaps the 2 generals thought that the weather had just improved and no one would have any ideas about the Great Wu City. After a few years of living peacefully, they had let down their guard and decided their ending. Announce it, Great Khan. After a long time, Bushi finally stopped being silent and expressed his attitude. Shikai Er's body shook when he heard this. His long-time wish was about to be fulfilled. It was impossible to say that he was not moved. But before there was a confirmation of Ahuri's death, he was still a little nervous. Seeing that Shikai did not immediately agree, Bushi tried to persuade him again. Great Khan, the army cannot be without a commander for a day. As long as you succeed the position of Great Khan, even if Ahuli comes back to life, what could he do? At that time, the army will be full of generals who support the Great Khan. There is no need to worry about any storms. But if this drags on for too long, the army will become unstable. Shikai also knew that Bushi's words were for his own good. He thought that as long as he succeeded the position of Great Khan, the matter would be settled. Even if there was a problem, he could use the position of Great Khan to give orders. In the end, he nodded, "Good. Then I will have to trouble General Bushi." Shikai finally agreed. Bushi's face was naturally filled with joy. He quickly said, "Good. Then the Great Khan will leave everything to me. Tomorrow is the auspicious day. I will go and prepare." Soon, the news spread throughout the army. Since Great Khan Ahuri had died in battle, the most senior and most meritorious Shikai would succeed the position of Great Khan. The ceremony would be held tomorrow morning. At that time, all the cavalry would be given 1 silver as a reward. The commoners who attended the ceremony would receive a day's worth of food. The ceremony was so grand. It was to show the righteousness of the Great Khan. Often, when a person lacked something, they would want to show it to the outside world to prove that they had something. It was also a move to buy people's hearts. Whether it was giving out silver or food, although it wasn't a lot, it was mainly to show the new Khan's concern for the army and the people. This was the most important thing. Once the news was out, the entire city's 100,000 citizens soon knew about it. This was the first time many of them had heard of Ahuli's death, and they couldn't help but feel sad. They weren't sure if the new Mongol Khan would still take care of them, but more people were happy for that day's rations. In any case, it was always a good thing to get some food for free. In Siberia, where there were few fields, food was very precious. The whole city knew about this, and many people were looking forward to the new Khan's succession tomorrow. To them, although Ahuri treated them well and gave them a relatively safe living environment, a dead person was obviously not worth much compared to the benefits they could get from it. This was the pitiful nature of human nature. This was the reality of life. Under the expectant gazes of the crowd, early the next morning, Cycle changed into a dignified new robe with wide sleeves. He also held the scepter that represented his identity as the Khan. Accompanied by Busi and a group of bodyguards, he walked towards the largest square in the city. On both sides of the road, there were countless citizens waiting there. Firstly, they could watch the show, and secondly, they could drink and eat for the day. No matter how one looked at it, it was a good deal. Also in the crowd, Yangtze's intelligence personnel were also observing the surroundings. Today was also an important day for them. Wearing clean clothes and cloth armor, holding sabers, numerous Mongol cavalry came to the square to maintain order. At the same time, they were also witnesses to the new Khan's succession. As the auspicious time approached, Cycle finally appeared under the crowd. He had a smile on his face, and the corners of his mouth curled upwards. That smile couldn't be hidden. Ever since he was saved by Ahuri and saw the might of the Khan, he had been dreaming about this beautiful dream. Now that it had finally come true, the excitement made him unable to control himself. If it wasn't for the fact that he had to maintain the dignity of a Khan, he would have jumped up in joy. A monkey wearing a crown. In the crowd, Guangzhun brought a few intelligence personnel to watch this scene. Unknowingly, these words came out of his mouth. Perhaps because Yang Qindong was the heavenly Khan. In the eyes of the Yangtze people who were loyal to him, the other Khans in the world were all fake, and they were all their enemies. Not far from Guangzhun and the others, Ahuri, who was wearing a black robe and covering his face, was also watching this scene. If it was someone close to him, they would be able to hear the sound of his teeth grinding against each other. It was a kind of hatred that made one want to eat flesh. Ahuri, who had fainted, had been staying in the basement that Yangtze's intelligence department had dug out to heal his injuries. What he didn't expect was that his seemingly incurable excessive blood loss had been revived through a blood transfusion. The ancients said that the body, hair, and skin were all given to the parents, not to mention the blood in the body. How could he give it to others so easily? How could others accept it just like that? This was a life-saving grace. Compared to the people he had saved betraying him, the five-star army, the people who were most likely to become his enemy, had actually saved him. The contrast between the two made him sigh. Ahuli was a person who knew how to be grateful. Now that the five-star army had saved his life, he naturally had to repay them as a man. Thus, he decided to cooperate with Guangzhun. This was not only to repay the five-star army's kindness, but also to take revenge for himself. Thus he came. As for when the basement was dug out, Ahuri didn't really care. He could see that the five-star army's thoughts about Great Crow City were not new. They must have had this idea for a long time. To think that he thought that he had the entire situation in Great Crow City under control. This was really a slap to his face. Ahuri, who was wearing a black robe, stood in the crowd and looked at Zicker's awe-inspiring appearance. He clenched his fists and waited for the most crucial moment to step out. How would Zicker know that under the protection of the crowd, he was walking step by step towards a high platform that was temporarily set up yesterday? The sacrificial items had already been prepared there. He only needed to go up under the wizard's prayer and accept the baptism. Then, he would be conferred the position of the new Khan by the longevity heaven. At that time, he would completely walk out of Ahuri's shadow. From today onwards, as long as Ahuri lived in the past, he wouldn't need to be afraid at all. His face was serious, and his eyes were filled with anticipation. This was the first time he felt that the wizard was so long-winded. He had already been standing there for half an hour, but the other party was still singing and dancing, as if he didn't want to get to the point. How would Zicker know that the wizard had already been dealt with by Guangzhun? Now that his family was in the hands of the spies, all his actions were just to delay time and cooperate with the five-star army. Outside Great Crow City, Yang Chandong looked at the military watch on his wrist. Seeing that the hour hand was pointing to the time to make a move, he lightly pointed to Beta Persei, who was following beside him. Beta Persei, who had been waiting on horseback for a long time, immediately ordered the artillery to prepare the cannoneers. At the same time, the cavalry was ready to launch an attack. They wanted to blast open the city gate at the first moment and let the army enter the city, giving the enemy a surprise attack. This time, Yang Chandong not only wanted to defeat the Mongolian tribe, but he also wanted the Great Crow City. From the Far East region to the Siberian region, the mountains were high and the roads were dangerous. It was really difficult to travel. If they didn't establish a logistical base here in advance, then the logistical supply would be a big problem during the battle. Yang Chandong rarely let the soldiers fight on an empty stomach. In his view, this was a sign of the incompetence of the general. If the soldiers couldn't even eat their fill, how could they talk about winning the battle? Originally, he was still worried about this problem. But when he understood the situation of the Great Crow City and saw that the periphery of the city was quite spectacular from afar, he had an idea. Why not continue Ahuli's efforts and build the city even higher and make it the strongest fortress of the five-star army in the Siberian region? In the future, all the food and logistical supplies transported from the Far East could be stored here. This way, he would have more confidence and a higher chance of victory in the upcoming battle with the Golden Horde. With this idea, Yang Chandong would not allow the Great Crow City to be destroyed. How to quickly rush into the city and excavate the city became something that Yang Chandong had to calculate. Beta Persei let the army prepare for the attack. The commander of the new Second Army's 1st Cavalry Division, Chow Chow, and the others also mounted their horses and put on their armor. They held light and sharp knives in their hands and were ready to attack at any time. With such an opportunity to perform well in front of Bugnam of Gojoseon, all the commanders and soldiers were holding their breaths in their hearts. They all hoped that they could be the first soldiers and the first officers to enter the city. Everything was ready, except for the east wind. In the Great Crow City, the east wind finally blew at the time when the time arrived. To everyone's surprise, the first person to react was the adept who had been singing, dancing, and talking for a long time. Just when tens of thousands of people and soldiers were looking at each other, the wizard finally stopped talking, which made many people relax. Among the onlookers, there was no lack of elderly people. This was not the first time they had participated in the self-titled cons. But there had never been a time like this where the ceremony lasted for such a long time, which made them a little confused. Many people thought in their hearts, this wizard is too good at showing off. I don't know what's wrong with him, but he talked so much. Does it take so long to worship the heavens? Chapter 1405. The good thing was that it was finally over. Everyone was waiting for the shaman to speak. He wanted to use the name of Tengri to make Saikir the new Khan. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. Everyone in the square shut their mouths at the same time. Even the children were warned by their parents to keep their mouths shut. It was as if they were afraid that crying at this moment would bring bad luck and they would be punished. Saikir and the other generals also looked at the shaman, waiting for the final judgment. Under such circumstances, the shaman finally spoke. He shouted loudly, "After I communicated with Tengri, I received a notice." Saikir. As he spoke, the shaman's gaze fell on Saikir, who was full of anticipation. He said, "Saikir is an abandoned disciple of Tengri. He forced the death of his savior. He is unfilial and has been abandoned by the heavens. Everyone has the right to punish him." What? For a moment, everyone's eyes widened. Some did not believe it. Some even dug their ears with their hands. They could not believe it. Saikir's smile froze. After he understood everything, he turned to look at Busi, who was beside him. His first instinct told him that this must be the work of this person. He had entrusted everything to this person. Now that there was a problem, who else could it be but him? In fact, he should have known that Busi was also an ambitious person. It was all his fault for being careless. Saikir's cold gaze fell on him. Busi could not help but shiver. Then he thought of something and shook his head. "It's not me. It's not me. Men, take down the shaman and kill him." "Who dares?" Seeing that Busi wanted to destroy the evidence, Saikir was not going to let it go. He shouted angrily and stopped a few Mongolian soldiers who were about to rush out. Before the matter was thoroughly investigated, Siko would not allow anything to happen to the Magi. Otherwise, he would forever be labeled as a person abandoned by the heavens. Moreover, wizards were not easy to kill. In the Mongol tribes at that time, they needed the guidance of wizards to ask for luck, to see a doctor, to build a big tent, and to look at feng shui. Such people had a strong influence among the people. If they wanted to kill a wizard now, the people who came to watch the ceremony would not agree. Sure enough, there was a commotion among the commoners. Someone shouted, "Protect the wizard." Among the commoners, there were young men who took the lead and rushed towards the wizard. They protected him tightly and did not let anyone touch him. Since the sorcerer could not be captured, Siko glared at Busi, waiting for an explanation. At this time, Bushi felt like he was suffering in silence, unable to express his bitterness. But after all, he was still a smart person. He quickly reacted and begged Shikai for mercy. "Great Khan, I don't have such thoughts. Right now, only a few people in the army listen to me. Even if you can't become the Great Khan, do you think I can? Will the army and the people agree?" This answer caused Cycle's expression to brighten, and he nodded in agreement. Ahuli had just died, and the army was still unstable. If there was a problem with him, the army would be in chaos. This would not benefit Bushi at all. Perhaps this was not something he could do, and if it was not Bushi who did it, who could it be? Just as Shikai was puzzled, the wizard who was protected by the crowd spoke again. "Shikai is a man abandoned by the heavens. Everlasting heaven has sent a new heavenly Khan to save everyone. Everyone, please wait and see. Bulsh asterisk T. Where did this heavenly Khan come from?" Zyker immediately cursed. In the eyes of the Mongols, the earliest heavenly Khan was the Tang king, Li Shimin, who dealt a heavy blow to their ancestors. In their hearts, The only one who could truly hold the position was one of their ancestors, the invincible Genghis Khan, who killed people like flies. Whether it was the former or the latter, they had died many years ago. How could there be any title of Heavenly Khan? Not only Shikai, but even the ordinary people were puzzled. Could this wizard really be spouting nonsense here? Just as everyone was puzzled, and Shikai was about to counterattack. If he overthrew this wizard, it would be equivalent to overthrowing what this wizard had said before. In this way, his identity as a man abandoned by the heavens could not be established. The wizard spoke again. The everlasting heaven has sent down a heavenly Khan. Naturally, there will be a sign. Next, there will be thunder rolling. Everyone can only wait and see. Thunder rolling? After hearing this, almost 9 out of 10 people could not help but look up at the sky. It had to be said that the weather she had chosen for this auspicious day was not bad. Under the clear sky, there was not a single dark cloud, and there was not even the slightest hint of rain. Ha ha ha! After looking up at the sky, many people began to laugh maniacally. At this time, more people began to think that this wizard was indeed a little crazy and began to make irresponsible remarks. Shikai was also laughing at the sky. The wizard's words made him feel much more relaxed. The higher such a person jumped, the happier he would be. This would only prove that this wizard was unreliable and that his words could not be trusted. In this way, there was no need for him to say anything. He was already innocent. However, this laughter came to an abrupt stop, because at this moment, a rumbling sound came from the horizon. Following that, the earth seemed to tremble, and some people who could not stand still began to stagger. At the same time, more people opened their eyes wide. When they looked at the wizard, their eyes were filled with deep respect and fear. Were wizards so powerful? Could they really communicate with the everlasting heaven? Many of the people from the White Russian tribe who came here originally did not believe in wizards, but now they could not help but believe in the truth. The rumbling sound was, of course, not thunder rolling. Couldn't you see that the sky was still incomparably blue? This sound was made by the cannons of the 5-star army. Under the coordination of the cannons from the outside and the inside, the timing of the attack was accurate, resulting in the greatest effect. At this moment, the sound of the cannons continued. The east gate of the great Raven City had been completely blown open. Under the gate, countless armored new Second Army cavalry rushed into the city. The wizard stood among the crowd, enjoying the worship of the crowd. However, he was still in a daze. He only said these words because his family was controlled by Wang Guang. For their safety, he had no choice but to say these words. Even before this, he was already prepared to be despised by the crowd. This was because he did not believe that the everlasting heaven would send down any lightning punishment. If even he did not believe it, how could he convince others? He was even prepared to end his career. With his death, he could ensure the safety of his family, so it was worth it. He only hoped that the one called Wang Guang would do as he said. However, who would have thought that when he said those words according to Wang Guang's plan, there would actually be a lightning punishment? Could it be that Wang Guang was the one who could communicate with the heavens? Not only was the wizard full of questions, but Ahu, who had been hiding in the crowd, was also dumbfounded. He also had a face full of doubts. What was going on? Was this Magus really that powerful? If he had known this earlier, he would have treated him as an important guest. Then there would not be so many worries in the great Raven City. It's your turn. Among the crowd, the calmest was Wang Guang and a group of secret agents. They had already known what was going to happen and had calculated everything. Now that everything was normal, he came to Ahuri's side and reminded him. Oh, with this reminder, Ahu remembered that he still had a mission. With the help of a few secret agents, he squeezed through the crowd and walked up to the high platform. Everyone was still in a state of shock, so no one noticed the movements of the black-robed man. It was only when Ahuli walked up to the stage and appeared beside Shikai that some of the bodyguards noticed. Someone shouted, "Who are you? Why aren't you backing down?" You're just someone who's been abandoned by the heavens. What's there to be proud of?" Ahu, who had once led 20,000 soldiers, would not be frightened by the shouts of a few soldiers. After a cold snort, he took off his black robe and revealed his original appearance. Ah, it's the Great Khan. The bodyguards had all seen Ahuli before. After recognizing his identity, they still greeted him as they used to. That's right, it's this Khan, Ahu replied in a deep voice. He suddenly turned to look at the commoners in the square and shouted, I'm Ahu. I didn't die. This Khan has returned. Ah, it's the Great Khan. Someone among the commoners took the lead and shouted, then knelt on the ground. With this leader, the other commoners also knelt on the ground out of habit. From this, it could be seen that Ahu's efforts were not in vain. At least, he still had a lot of support among the commoners. Ahu's sudden appearance caused the commoners to kneel. At the same time, it also caused Cicero and Busi to feel fear. A person who was already dead in their eyes had suddenly appeared in front of them. How could they not be shocked, agitated, or even terrified? The commoners all knelt down, and many Mongol soldiers also knelt on the ground. They were all low-level soldiers and did not know about the struggle between the higher-ups. In their eyes, many people were still used to recognizing Ahu as the Great Khan. The situation suddenly went out of control, and Cicero's brows furrowed. At this moment, Ahuli opened his mouth. First, he pointed his finger at Cycle, then said in a clear voice, This is a despicable person. This Khan saved his life and gave him a new lease of life, but he actually colluded with others to harm this Khan, forcing me to go into hiding due to my serious injuries. This person has committed a heinous crime. The shamans were right when they said that he was abandoned by the heavens. Ahu stood out and accused, causing the already chaotic square to become even more chaotic. Chapter 1406. Since ancient times, a mountain could not accommodate two tigers. Ahuli was not dead, so Psyker's position as the Khan was not rightful. Adding on the fact that the sorcerer's words had been abandoned by the heavens, Psyker's expression was extremely ugly, and his face was extremely pale. Even if he was beaten to death, he would never have thought that not only was Ahuli not dead, but he was also alive and kicking in front of him. Moreover, he had appeared just as he was about to inherit the throne. All of this was too much of a coincidence. It could be said that his opponent had appeared at the most inappropriate time. This had completely ruined his previous plan, and Psyker did not know how to react. He could only stand there and tremble, not knowing whether it was from fear or anger. On the other hand, Bushi was still able to maintain a clear head. Although this series of events had greatly exceeded his expectations, he was not the one who saw it. As a bystander, he had a clear view of the situation. When he looked at Ahuli, killing intent appeared in his eyes. In his opinion, although the situation was a bit complicated, it was all because of Ahuli's appearance. As long as Ahuli died, no one would be a match for Psyker, and there would be no reason for him to take the throne. As for the sorcerer's words, he only needed to accuse him of being Ahuli's accomplice and find a reputable sorcerer to refute the rumors. In the face of absolute power, even if the commoners had their own opinions, they would not dare to speak carelessly in order to protect themselves. After making up his mind, Bushi quietly signaled to the soldiers behind him to take action. He then stepped forward, blocking in front of Sakare as he shouted at Ahuli. Ahuli, you traitor of the Mongol race, you have already surrendered to the Russians. Your so-called love for the people is just an excuse. You want the army to have no food to eat so that we can lose our ability to fight. That way, we can surrender to the Russian masters. I never thought that you would do such a sinister thing, but you still did it. Great Khan Psyker was merciful and did not kill you. He only let you go, but you still dare to provoke us. Do you really think we won't dare to kill you? What did it mean to be the guilty party suing the victim? What did it mean to distort the truth? What did it mean to make something out of nothing? What was the meaning of if you have a mind to condemn someone, you can always find some excuse to condemn him? At this moment, Ahuli knew everything. He had never looked at Bushi so seriously before. It was only at this moment that he realized that Bushi was a talent who could talk nonsense with his eyes wide open. If such a person were to be sent as an envoy, the effect would be unimaginable. Ahuli wasn't the only one who was shocked. Many others were also looking at this scene in shock. However, not all of them knew that this was a lie. Instead, they were considering the credibility of this matter. Bushi was powerful because his words were both true and false. For example, it was true that he loved the people and treated the army harshly. Because of this, many people believed in this saying. If that was the case, then everything would be easy to explain. Presumably, even the wizard was one of Ahuri's people. Everything that happened just now must have been arranged by them. He had actually managed to turn the situation around. It was no wonder that Ahuli valued him so much. After a while, Psyker finally recovered. Now that he had come to this point, he had no way out. Otherwise, death would be the only thing that awaited him. Psyker, who couldn't retreat anymore, used Bushi's words to shout loudly. "That's right, Ahuli. I once spared your life out of kindness, but I didn't expect you to be so unrepentant. You colluded with the wizard to fool everyone. Since that's the case, I can't let you live anymore. Men, take him down." Bushi's personal guards, who were already prepared, drew their swords and rushed forward after receiving the order. Their eyes were fierce, and they looked like they would kill anyone who stood in their way. If it was in the suburbs or a spacious place, there would be nowhere to hide in the face of these ferocious personal guards. However, this was a crowded square. The result was completely different. At this moment, everyone was huddled together. There was nowhere to hide, even if he wanted to. Of course, Ahuli couldn't dodge, and it was even more difficult for those personal guards to get close to him. Guang, who had already received Yang Chendong's order to protect Ahuli, had also made various plans. Now that someone wanted to get close to Ahuli without waiting for his order, the spies he had arranged in the crowd began to move. What are they doing? They haven't even explained the situation clearly, and they want to take him down. Are they trying to silence him? I think they're trying to silence him. This is a sign of guilt. What kind of person is Ahuli? He treats the people so well. How could he do something bad to them? They're obviously jealous. Come everyone, let's protect Ahuli. Isn't it better to talk things out face to face? Within the crowd, voices rang out one after another. These were all words that Wang Guang had arranged beforehand. Now, with their lead, some of the commoners who did not know the truth also joined in the commotion and were not afraid of things blowing up. For a moment, it was even more difficult for those personal guards to get close to Ahuli. The situation was so chaotic that Shikir and Bushi didn't expect it to be like this. Ahuli, who was being protected by the crowd, was slowly moving out. Once he escaped, there would be two voices in the Great Crow City. This was definitely not what they wanted to see. After they looked at each other, they saw a fierce look in each other's eyes. "Let's kill them." Sikong sighed and pretended to be forced to do so. Okay. Bushi was waiting for this sentence. In troubled times, severe punishment was needed. In the face of chaos, the most effective way was to kill until the opponent surrendered, until there were no opponents left. Men, call the archers and prepare to shoot. Bushi's face also flashed with killing intent. For his own glory and wealth, he treated these people as enemies. Originally, 2,000 cavalrymen were sent to the square to maintain order. As soon as the order was given, the cavalrymen quickly gathered and mounted their horses. Their bows were drawn, and their killing intent was overwhelming. Not good. They're going to kill indiscriminately. Everyone, be careful. Wang Guang, who was in the crowd, noticed this scene and hurriedly shouted out. He then lowered his body as much as possible and hid among the Mongolian and White Russian people. At the same time, his eyes were filled with anxiety, and he would occasionally look into the distance. He wanted to wait for Bugnam of Gojoseon to arrive with the main force. The new Second Army's 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Chow Chow, was the first to charge into the Great Crow City. There was a sudden explosion, and when the East Gate was blasted open, many of the Mongol soldiers were still standing there in a daze. They simply couldn't understand why the perfectly fine city gate would suddenly break and where the loud noise came from. Reality soon gave them the answer. The ground began to tremble, and the sounds of killing could be heard. A black whirlwind came from afar. A five-star flag fluttering in the wind entered the eyes of the Mongol soldiers guarding the city. It's the enemy. It's the Han cavalry. On the city wall, a sharp-eyed soldier saw this scene and shouted out in fear. Where did the enemy come from? Where did the enemy come from? A Chiliarch who was guarding the city hurriedly climbed up and looked into the distance. Then he said in shock, "No, that's impossible. How could there be so many enemies here? Did they fall from the sky?" It was no wonder that this Chiliarch was so shocked. This place had just been developed, and not only were the roads difficult to travel, it was also difficult for the army to transport supplies. They really couldn't think of anyone who would attack them at this time, as this didn't fit with the rules of the past. The so-called rules were meant to be broken. Before the five-star army set out, they had prepared a large amount of biscuits, instant noodles, canned ham, bread, and other things. Not only did these things not take up much space, but they could also fill their stomachs, greatly solving the problem of logistics. Therefore, things that were impossible in the eyes of others were possible in the eyes of the five-star army soldiers. Under the shocked gazes of the Mongolians, the five-star army charged into the city. After the thick city gates were destroyed by the cannonballs, the five-star army charged into the city, breaking the iron rule that only the Mongolian cavalry could attack Seoul, and the Han cavalry could only defend. With the reward of military merits, all the five-star cavalry soldiers led the charge. They were like an unstoppable black whirlwind that no one could stop as they charged into the city. From time to time, they would even take out their bows and shoot at the Mongolian cavalry, killing people along the way. No one could stop them, and they were invincible. Division Commander Xiao Chao led the 1st Cavalry Division and charged into the city at lightning speed. Before the Mongolian cavalrymen could understand what was going on, they were already heading towards the square in the city. Before they set out, Division Commander Xiao had already looked at the map of the city, and he was very clear about his destination. After the 1st Cavalry Division, the other 3 divisions of the new 2nd Army also charged into the city. The Mongolian cavalry did not even have time to report, and they had already charged into the city, arriving at the city walls and taking control of the situation. Those who resist will be killed. Those who surrender will live. The moment the five-star army cavalry appeared, their battle cries shook the city, following which arrows flew in all directions, and the Mongolian soldiers who wanted to resist were killed before they could even find their war horses. More and more five-star army soldiers entered the city, and more arrows threatened the lives of the Mongolian soldiers. In just 15 minutes, at least 500 Mongolian soldiers were killed, and those who were still alive were shocked by the unstoppable momentum of the five-star army. Finally, some of them threw down their weapons and chose to kneel on the ground and surrender. These Mongol soldiers had spent most of their time in the Great Crow City, and their ferocious side had already been smoothed out. Facing the valiant soldiers of the five-star army, who were completely unprepared, how could they be a match for them? Chapter 1407. Entering from the east gate, the sound of iron hooves stomping on the ground spread out. On the streets, some of the citizens who didn't attend the ceremony of the Great Khan fell to their knees in fear when they saw the five-star army's cavalry, dressed in black armor and riding on tall horses. Because the Mongol cavalry was too poor, their clothing was not uniform, and most of them wore cloth armor, unlike the five-star army who wore standard armor. When the cavalry passed by, the trembling commoners knelt on the ground, trembling all over. They did not know what fate awaited them. On the square, there were already hundreds of Mongolian cavalry raising their bows and arrows. Under Percy's orders, the arrows shot out and landed on the crowd in front of them. In an instant, many of the civilians who had nowhere to hide were hit by the arrows and started to bleed. Chaos ensued. No one had thought that watching the ceremony of the Great Khan would be life-threatening. In order to protect their lives, or perhaps it was out of instinct, the commoners fled in all directions. They did not know where was safe, but they knew that standing in the same place was dangerous. Many of the commoners who fled in all directions ran towards the east gate. Their homes were there, and they were escaping back to their homes. However, very quickly, those people turned back and ran towards the square at an even faster speed. What's going on? Suddenly, so many commoners ran back, and all of them revealed even more terrified expressions than before. When this scene fell into Cycle's eyes, he had a bad feeling. Rumble, rumble. The sound of horse hooves hitting the ground could finally be heard as they got closer and closer. It reached the square and reached the ears of the Mongolian soldiers. To the veterans, this sound was not unfamiliar. Cycle and Bushy's eyes were filled with suspicion. They did not order the other cavalry to come to the square. So who did it? Could it be him? At the same time, the two of them thought of Ahuli. After all, only this former great Khan had the ability to mobilize a cavalry army. However, they had already replaced the generals with their own confidants. So who would have the guts to do this? At this moment, they did not think that there would be enemies charging into the city. Perhaps it was because they had always been the ones looking for trouble, and no one had taken the initiative to attack them, so their vigilance had been lowered to the lowest. How could such an army not be defeated? Just as the two of them looked towards the east in fear, thinking about which general would come, and whether or not they would be able to use them, the five-star army finally appeared in the distance. Black armor, cavalry swords that shone under the sun, as well as the unforgettable flag of the five-star army. When Cycle and Bushy saw it, their expressions changed, and they said in unison, "It's the five-star army." The five-star army, they had fought with them before. It was the third army led by Wu Shang. A few years ago, they had entered Siberia through the Far East region, but they quickly entered the territory of the Golden Horde. Cycle had fought with them before and lost. Fortunately, Wu Shang didn't intend to stay for long. Otherwise, the most powerful force in Siberia would have already changed hands. Even so, that battle had left a deep impression on Cycle. The enemy's discipline was strict, and they attacked and defended well. Their soldiers were brave, and even the most elite Mongol cavalry would not be much stronger than them. He had once rejoiced that the five-star army did not intend to stay, but now they had appeared again, and in such a silent manner. In Cycle's eyes, not only was there shock, there was also deep fear. How could it be them? Bushy recognized the other party and thought of something. His original calmness was finally replaced by panic. He was not afraid when the wizard said that he was the son of heaven, and he was not afraid when Ahuli appeared, because in his eyes, these people could be killed at any time. But now that the five-star army had appeared, he finally felt fear. Especially when he saw them enter the city, the fear grew even stronger. Great Khan. Bushy turned around and asked for Cycle's opinion. He wanted to gain some confidence from Cycle, but he was destined to be disappointed. Cycle's situation was not much better than his, and there was also deep fear in his eyes. After hearing Bushy's call, he swallowed his saliva and said, "It's the five-star army. How did they enter the city? I'm afraid we can't beat them." Then, should we retreat? Block had the same idea. Although he was also curious about why the other party appeared in the Great Raven City and what the soldiers guarding the gate were doing, compared to these questions, preserving their lives was more important. Cycle and Bushy saw that the situation was not good, so they prepared to escape. But Wang Guang, who had been watching their every move, began to move. He had already heard the sound of horse hooves and knew that the main force of the army had arrived. His courage was immediately boosted, and he immediately gave the order to attack. Although the security bureau only had 20 people, some of them had to be sent to protect Ahuli, so they could only mobilize 20 people. But they were still not afraid, and quickly approached Cycle and Bushy while the crowd was retreating. Amidst the chaos, no one noticed these 20 people. Only when they formed a circle and began to close in did they stand out. First, a group of personal guards shouted for the newcomers to stop. Then, swords and sabers clashed together. As the team leader, Wang Guang had an epic-making grenade on him. He had prepared it early in the morning, just in case he needed it. As for what to do after entering a city, it could be said that they were very experienced. Because the five-star army did not cause trouble in the city, the law and order of the Great Crow City was quickly restored. When Yang Chendong and the new Second Army entered the city, there were already many residents walking on the streets. Not bad. The residents here are very brave. Under the tight protection of a group of Black Knight dragon guards, Yang Chendong, who was riding a white dragon, traveled through the city. He couldn't help but sigh as he looked at the scene before him. Yes, compared to the fear that we brought to them, they're more afraid of not having food to eat. The commander of the new Second Army said. Half of his blood was Mongolian, and he was used to being cold and hungry since young. He knew that in the eyes of the poor, sometimes life was not the most important thing. Being able to eat was more important. Of course, Yang Chendong understood the meaning of these words. He could not help but sigh. Yes, there are many people in this world who have worked hard for a long time, but still have no food to eat. However, before long, they will be free and become Yangtze citizens. As long as they're not too lazy, they will not starve. When speaking of this matter, Yang Chendong felt a little proud. After all, because of his arrival, many residents who would have starved to death had food to eat and were able to survive. This was a matter of great merit. Chapter 1408. Shibi was also influenced by Yang Chendong. He nodded and said, "Yes, to be able to join the Yangtze is the good fortune of these people." This was not flattery. It was the truest feeling he had after so many years. Back then, he had almost starved to death. But now, what he ate, what he wore, and what he lived in, which part of it was not satisfactory. It was because of this truest feeling that he wanted more Mongols to be like him. At least, they would not have to worry about food anymore. Hearing Shibi's sigh, Yang Chendong had a thought and said, "Commander Shibi has the heart of a bodhisattva. Since that is the case, I will leave the matter of persuading the army and the people to you. Is there a problem? Please open the granary and release the grain." Shibi cupped his fist as if he was prepared. Approved. Yang Chendong did not even frown. He knew better than anyone that agriculture was the foundation of a country. However, he also knew that without commerce, one would not be rich. Therefore, he had never relied on agriculture to make a fortune. He was also open to all aspects of agriculture. Not only did he encourage the people to farm, but he also set a protective price to prevent the price of grain from falling during good harvests. With the help of various policies, Yangtze had an unimaginable amount of grain. As long as he needed it, there would be an endless supply of grain from the 3 eastern provinces to the far east and Siberia. Although at least 50% of the grain would be consumed along the way, Yang Chendong did not care about these losses. Just like when he came from the far east, a few large grain transport teams also left the city. It would not be long before they arrived at Great Raven City to solve the grain problem. On behalf of the people, I thank the king. Shibi cupped his fist and bowed solemnly. Then, he left with the guards. Yang Chendong was accompanied by leader Wang Guang from the Security Bureau to his residence in the city. Guang Wang had made a great military contribution this time. Not only had he saved Ahuli Khan, but he had also left behind the 2 main culprits, Zyker and Busi. Hearing that he had wasted a grenade because of this, Yang Chendong laughed and said to Beta Persei, "When group leader Wang leaves, give him 2 boxes of grenades." "All right, give him a gun. Don't forget." "Yes, young master," Beta Persei agreed with a chuckle. Guang Wang's face was naturally filled with gratitude. When he thought about how he could finally wear a spear and how it was personally given to him by the 6th young master, how glorious it was, he couldn't stop smiling. From Wang Guang, Yang Chendong had a clearer understanding of the situation in Great Wu City. "Oh, according to you, Ahuli is a talent. Then I'd like to meet him. Group leader Wang, please make the arrangements." "Yes." Yang Chendong did not intend to force Ahuli to become a commander. A forcibly picked melon would not be sweet. If Ahuli still wanted to govern a place after meeting parting ways, then he would let him leave the army and start as a small official. The Yang faction had developed to this point, and both the number of generals and civil officials had greatly increased. Although with the expansion of the territory, It was still somewhat insufficient, but it was no longer as strained as before. The great Raven City was taken down by Yang Qindong with the smallest price. This was also because of Yunji meeting. On the other hand, in Wuxi City to the north, Tian Hu's first cavalry army couldn't find a suitable opportunity, so they set up their formation and engaged in a bloody battle with Hurahan. Last year, Hulahan led 30,000 iron cavalry into the Far East region and took advantage of the chaos to enter All City. However, when Yang Qindong led his army to All City, they suffered several defeats in succession. Even great General Akmu died in battle. In the end, not only did they lose All City, they only brought back 10,000 iron cavalry. With their strength greatly reduced, they became much more obedient. After returning to All City, they began to recruit new soldiers. They were waiting for the time when they were strong enough to take revenge. During this time, he was afraid that someone would cause trouble for him. So he sent a messenger to the great Raven City to instigate a rebellion. This was also a way to weaken the enemy's strength. Hulahan was not like Ahuli. He did not know how to prioritize the common people. In his opinion, the common people would always be common people. They were only fit to be his slaves, his soldiers, and die for him. His thinking was not right, so the treatment of soldiers was very poor. As a result, the expansion of his army was not very smooth. After half a year, he finally recruited 5,000 soldiers with great difficulty. Before he could even gather enough war horses for these 5,000 new soldiers, the world's #1 cavalry army suddenly appeared. When he found out that the 5-star army was coming, Hulahan did not put up any resistance out of instinct. Under the protection of the new General Yilahan, he led 5,000 of the most elite cavalry to escape. His fighting ability was average, but his escaping ability was top-notch. Afraid of being caught, Hulahan escaped with a light carriage. His speed was not something that Tian Hu could catch up to. In the end, he could only watch as Hulahan escaped from his sight. Without the protection of the Great Khan, the Mongolian army was nothing more than a pile of loose sand. When Tian Hu took out the 5 cannons that accompanied the army and began to bombard the city gate, there was a loud explosion accompanied by cries and screams. The city gate was opened, and the city was in chaos. Different from the firearms of this era, they only used solid bullets. Compared to the bombs used by the 5-star army, the difference was too great. The moment the cannons exploded, many things were already decided. When the cannons blew open the city gate, it also destroyed the morale of the Mongolian soldiers. The 5-star army's cavalry was like a ferocious tiger descending from a mountain as they neatly entered the city. This allowed the soldiers and commoners in the city to see what a true elite was. After seeing the world's #1 cavalry army in high spirits and well-equipped, the commoners who originally did not have a good impression of Hulahan completely gave up on resisting. In their eyes, no matter how bad their lives were, could it be worse than having Hulahan as their great Khan? Tian Hu was Yang Qindong's student and could be considered an all-rounder. He knew that it was easier to conquer a country than to defend it. After taking over the city, he sent a telegram to Chunbo in the Far East, asking him to send people to transport military supplies and send local officials to take over the city. At the same time, he calmed the hearts of the commoners and did the same thing as Yang Qindong, opening up the granaries to the commoners. The 2 armies unexpectedly descended from the sky, and the Siberian region quickly became part of the Yangtze territory. A month later, this matter finally reached the ears of the Golden Horde and the Rasi principalities. After Hulahan escaped, the first person he sought refuge with was the great Khan of the Golden Horde, Aluhe Mahama. Genghis Khan's descendants had established 4 Khanates, namely the Golden Horde, also known as the Kipchak Khanate, the Chagatai Khanate, the Ajadai Khanate, and the Ili Khanate. The Golden Horde was conquered by Genghis Khan's eldest son, Joki, and grandson. After Genghis Khan's death, only his direct descendants, namely Joki, Chagatai, Ajadai, and Talyui's descendants, were known as the Golden Horde and had the right to inherit the Khanate's throne. After Talyui's son, Monk became the great Khan of the Mongols. The range was further narrowed down to Taoyui's descendants. The Yuan dynasty emperors and the Ming dynasty Khans, such as Dian Khan, all came from this line. Chapter 1409. In 1242, Batu suddenly retreated back to Russia and led his army to launch the Second Mongol Western Expedition. The Mongol Western Expedition quickly conquered the vast lands of Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. After the Western Expedition, Batu established the city of Batu Salai in the north of Astrakhan. The Volga River became the economic and political center of the Golden Horde. It had been more than 200 years since the Mongols first established themselves in Russia. Over the past 200 years, the resistance in Russia had become more and more intense. Even if Yang Qindong hadn't appeared, they would have become independent in the near future. However, with the arrival of Yang Qindong, history had to be rewritten. Uluhe Mahama was the current Great Khan of the Golden Horde. He was the 39th monarch of the Golden Horde. He was the true commander of the Mongols in this vast region. Hulahan brought 5,000 elite cavalry to join the Golden Horde. Mahama took them under his wing based on the principle of strength in numbers. However, his son, Bora, objected to this. Mahama was almost 60 years old. His son, Bora, had already grown up. Not only that, but his grandson, Hanyad Ali, would also become a general who could mount a horse and fight in battle. It was this inheritance that allowed his family to sit on the Great Khan's throne for so long. Bora, who had long been listed as the successor, objected. Even Mahama had to take this seriously. The father and son discussed the issue of Hulahan in the palace of Salai. "Father, I object to accepting Hulahan." Bora's voice was loud and clear. He was tall and strong, and his voice was full of energy. In contrast, Mahama wore a tiger skin draped over his shoulders. He leaned back on his dragon throne and said calmly, "Reason." Bora, who was used to his father's way of speaking, immediately said, "Father, Hulahan offended the 5-star army. This time, he only brought 5,000 cavalry. If we give up on our friendship with General Wushang because of them, we will lose the big picture for the small." The Wushang Bola spoke was the commander of the 5-star army's 3rd army, Wushang, who had arrived in this area a few years ago. When Wushang first arrived, he was ostracized by the local forces. Not only the Mongol soldiers, but even the White Russian soldiers were not friendly to them. It wasn't until he displayed his strength, fought a few tough battles, and achieved victory that he finally received everyone's recognition. But even so, due to the short time they had spent in the Golden Horde and the long journey, it was difficult for them to obtain the support of the Yangtze headquarters. Their development was also very slow. Now, they had only established New Xia City in the northern part of the Golden Horde, and their range of activities was limited to that area. The Golden Horde's territory was a barren land to begin with, and they also had some military strength. For the Golden Horde, the gains from such a long expedition were indeed very limited, so they had been tolerating their existence. But no matter what, it was still a decent military force. Furthermore, New Xia City was not far from the Ross Duchy's territory, making it a target for the Golden Horde to rope in. They wanted to use Wushang to suppress the Ross Duchy, which would make it easier for them to attack their opponents. This also made Wushang's position in the 3rd Army higher, making it easier for him to find a way to survive in the cracks between the two sides. This was one of the Golden Horde's military strategies against external forces, and it was also recognized by everyone. But now, they had to make an enemy out of Wushang for the sake of 5,000 Mongol soldiers. No matter how you looked at it, it was not worth it. Bora had doubts in his heart. Mahama slowly opened his eyes. "What's wrong? You can't hold it in anymore." "Father, it's not that I can't hold it in. It's that your son thinks that we will lose the big picture for the small." Bora's eyes were wide open, his face full of dissatisfaction. Looking at his somewhat childish son, Mahama knew that some things had to be made clear. He simply asked, "Father, let me ask you, who is our biggest enemy right now?" "Of course it's the Ross Duchy. Bora didn't know why he would ask such a question. Even a 3-year-old child in the horde would know this. That's right. Mahama nodded. In recent years, our warriors have been arrogant, greedy, and unambitious. They have long since lost the courage and bravery of their ancestors. On the other hand, the Ross Duchy, under the leadership of the Grand Duke of Blindness, Vasily II's nickname, has become stronger and stronger. Although they are not as strong as us, the gap between us will slowly shrink. If this continues, there will come a day when we will not be their match. They will be our greatest enemy. Bora agreed with this point. He had been working hard for this. At least his Mongol branch had changed. They had begun to practice horsemanship and strengthen themselves. But the Golden Horde wasn't just under their control. There were other branches that were also quite powerful. Their lack of effort, however, was a source of great indignation to Bowler. He always thought that if all the Mongol soldiers had followed his example, it would not be impossible for them to restore the glory of their ancestors to their former glory. Bora nodded in agreement. Mahama smiled and said, "Now that we know who our biggest enemy is, what do you think we should do now that a third force has appeared? Should we pull one of them over and fight the other? Or should we watch the other two fight while we reap the benefits?" Of course we should reap the benefits. Bora answered instinctively without hesitation. After saying this, he suddenly shut his mouth. Then, he thought of something and said, "Father, do you mean to let Wu Sheng and the Ross dukedom fight while we watch from the sidelines?" Mahama was very pleased that his son understood his meaning so quickly. With such a son, at least one day, when he grew old, he could finally leave in peace. That's right. That's what my father thinks. However, we can't just stand by and do nothing. I'm afraid that the blind Grand Duke won't agree to this either. Therefore, we still have to send out our troops. However, we have to see how we can achieve the greatest victory with the least cost. Father, I understand now. You mean to say that we should first cooperate with the Ross dukedom to deal with Wu Sheng's army while they are closer to each other. That way, we can watch them fight and then reap the benefits, right? Bowler said, "Father, I understand now. What you mean is that we should first cooperate with the Ross dukedom to deal with Wu Sheng's army." Well said. That's exactly what Father means. Think about it. Since we are already going to war with Wu Sheng, why don't we accept Hulahan's surrender? He has 5,000 elite cavalry. Mahama chuckled. Bora finally understood Mahama's meaning. Excitement appeared on his face. Was the war finally about to begin? He, as a hero, could finally be put to use. This was something he had been looking forward to for a long time. But then he thought of something and said worriedly, "Father, how many men does Wu Sheng have? Can they be a match for the Ross Duchy's army?" Of course they can't, but didn't Hulahan say that? King Wunan of Damyong is here. With them, we should have the strength to fight. Mahama said as if he was giving advice. King Wunan of Damyong? Those two-legged sheep? When Boris said this, a trace of disdain appeared in his eyes. Two-legged sheep was a term that the Mongol cavalry used to call the weak Han Chinese. In their eyes, the Han Chinese were too weak, and they were like sheep that could be taken at any time. The only difference was that they lacked 2 legs. In other words, it was the same reason that some people in history call the Han Chinese the sick man of East Asia. No. Mahama shook his head and said, "These two-legged sheep are very different. They're very good at war. The Wara and Tatar tribes have been defeated by them. Moreover, this King Wunan of Damyong is very good at scheming and bewitching people." According to Hulahan, the enemy's army is not made up of Han Chinese. They have us Mongols and many other races. There is even a White Russian division with over 20,000 men. He is just like our ancestors, full of ambition. Speaking of this, Mahama seemed to have recalled something, and a look of yearning appeared on his face. Bora, on the other hand, fell in a deep thought. It could be said that he understood his father very well. This Wunan Wang of the great Ming dynasty could be valued by his father so much. It could be seen that he was not an ordinary person. However, the more it was like this, the more he wanted to meet this person. He did not believe that a two-legged sheep could go against the heavens. Bora was convinced by his father, and the matter of Hulahan's defection became a matter of course. The next step was to send a message to the Ross duchies, stating that they detested General Wu Sheng and the Han army in Nuxia City. This was originally their world, and even if there was a battle, it should be decided between them, not an outsider. In addition, there was news that the master behind Wu Sheng, King Wunan of Damyong, had led an army from afar. In order to prevent them from becoming stronger after meeting, it was time to eliminate this armed force. The capital of the Rossi Principalities. Vasily II, the Grand Duke of Moscow. Because he was blinded, his vision was extremely limited, and he was nicknamed the Grand Duke of Blindness. During Vasily II's reign, almost all the independent feudal territories within the Grand Duchy of Moscow were abolished. The independence of the Republican city-states of Novgorod, Vyatka, and Pskov was weakened. History said that he did a lot of preparatory work for Ivan III Vasilievich to unify Russia. He was an extremely capable talent in troubled times. The letter sent by Mahama was already in the hands of the Grand Duke of Blindness. After he learned the contents of the letter, he summoned a group of officials to discuss specific military matters. Among them was the extremely famous Ivan the Great in Russian history. In 1440 AD, the second son of Vasily II, the Lord of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, was born. Vasily II's first son, Yuri, died at an early age, so Vasily II placed a lot of hope on this child. According to the suggestion of the Archbishop of the Moscow Principality, the child was named Ivan, which later became Ivan the Great. Chapter 1410. His son Ivan, his generals Boris, Pyotr, Sergei, as well as Maxim from Novgorod, Turgenev from Vyatka, and Vanya from Pskov were involved in the meeting. The first thing the blind duke did was to announce Mahama's letter to the public. After that, he sat there quietly. He knew that after reading the letter, his subjects would definitely have something to say. As expected, after the letter was passed around, one of the generals, Sergei, was the first to speak. Grand Duke, this is a good thing. As long as we occupy Nuxia City, it will be equivalent to expanding our influence. This will be a great boost to our duchy and our Russian independence. Previously, they were afraid that the Mongols would suddenly interfere when they made a move on New Summer City. Now that the Mongols had the same idea and no longer had any concerns, it was time to make a move. Yes, we agree. Maxim and the others immediately voted in favor. Under the pressure of the blind Grand Duke, the power in their hands was getting smaller and smaller. If there was a chance to expand their influence, it would be a great opportunity to develop their strength. Naturally, no one wanted to miss out on something beneficial. After a while, several people spoke. Only Supreme General Boris and Ivan remained silent. They seemed to be thinking about something. The blind Grand Duke didn't hear them say anything, so he knew that they must have other ideas. He took the initiative to ask, Ivan, what do you think? Father-in-law, I don't have any ideas. Everything will be done according to everyone's wishes. Ivan raised his head. His voice was calm, but in his heart, he was somewhat unwilling. As early as when Wu Sheng first appeared here with a new army, Ivan had already dealt with them. At that time, Wu Sheng had received Yang Qindong's order to help the Rossi Duchy resist the pressure of the Golden Horde to the best of his ability. After the cooperation, the relationship between the two sides quickly became closer. It was also from then on that Ivan gained a better understanding of this Han army, called the Five-Star Army. This army was well-equipped and well-trained. They fought in a methodical manner. Many of their advanced military concepts were often eye-catching. Furthermore, they often cooperated with each other to deal with the military oppression of the Mongol army. Gradually, Ivan began to have thoughts of using them for his own purposes. For this reason, Ivan made a heavy promise. He said that as long as Wu Sheng was willing to lead the army and surrender to him, he would become one of the great generals of the Ross Duchy in the future. At that time, there would not be many people in the entire country who would have a more important position than him. With such a promise, Wu Sheng only said that he would consider it. At that time, Ivan was still full of confidence, but after several years, he still did not receive an answer, so he knew that the other party was tactfully rejecting him. Although Ivan was puzzled by this, he had never given up on the idea of making the other party surrender. In his opinion, the five-star army was too far away, and there were many things that were beyond his reach. As long as he sincerely invited them, they would definitely be moved by his sincerity. However, the situation hadn't come to a conclusion yet. The main force of the five-star army had actually arrived as reinforcements. This made him completely lose all hope of getting the other party to surrender. It was inevitable that he would feel disappointed, but he was a determined person after all. Since this path did not work, he would not think about it anymore. It was just a pity for a talent like Wu Shang. Right, the main force of the five-star army had arrived. He heard that his master, King Wenan of Damyang, had also come. If that was the case, would Wu Shang realize his prowess after he defeated this opponent? Would it be possible for him to come under his banner? Unknowingly, Ivan was filled with anticipation for Yang Qindong's arrival. He wanted to see what kind of ability this person had to be able to make a valiant general like Wu Shang work for him. Now that Ivan had expressed his stance, only great General Boris was left. This was a person that even the blind Duke respected greatly. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that this person's words could sometimes be compared to several people, especially when it came to military matters. He had the ability to keep his word. After asking Ivan, Boris knew that it was time for him to express his stance. He summarized his thoughts and said, "Speaking of the Han army in New Summer City, they can't be considered our friends anymore. Although they helped us fight a few battles with the Mongol army a few years ago and played a big role, as the Mongol army gradually restrained their blade rays and we continued to grow stronger, they didn't do anything for us anymore. Dealing with them is something that should be done." This meant that he agreed, but everyone knew that Boris didn't finish his words. He must have something else to say. Sure enough, Boris continued to express his stance. This time, the Mongol Khan made his stance clear and decided to make a move on New Summer City. Moreover, he intentionally sent us away. This clearly means that he wants to borrow our hands to deal with Wu Shang. Moreover, I heard that Wu Shang's master is about to arrive. If we act rashly and fail, countless variables will appear in the outcome of this matter. This is very disadvantageous to me. You should know that King Wu Nan of the Great Ming Dynasty was able to build a 20,000-strong White Russian army. This is enough to prove that this person has some means. Otherwise, why would our people risk their lives for him? Either we don't make a move against such an opponent, or if we do, we have to beat them until they have no choice but to retreat from this area. Well said. Great General Peter echoed loudly. This King Wenan of Damyang actually dares to build a White Russian army and use our people to fight. Does he really think that we don't exist? This kind of person needs to be taught a lesson. After everyone reached a consensus, a smile appeared on the face of Grand Duke Blindness, who was sitting at the head of the table. Well, since no one raises any objections, this matter will be handed over to General Boris. Everyone has to cooperate with him unconditionally. This is also a very important step in our expansion. We must win, and we must not lose. Yes, Grand Duke. Everyone at the meeting loudly agreed. Thus, a large net was spread out to target Wu Shang in New Summer City. New Summer City. It was originally an abandoned White Russian tribe's old site. But ever since Wu Shang brought the New Summer Army here, he had begun to rebuild it. Taking into account the raw materials, although the city wasn't very big, it was still enough to support 200,000 to 300,000 people. Standing in the courtyard, Wu Shang's face had a hint of vicissitudes of life. He stood straight and seemed to be thinking about something. If one paid attention to him, they would notice that his expression would occasionally become somewhat agitated. Sometimes, he would frown deeply, as if he was thinking about some difficult problem. Needless to say, he was happy. There was already news that the sixth young master had set out from Siberia and was heading towards him. When he thought about how he hadn't seen the sixth young master for 9 years, the longing in his heart grew stronger. This feeling of reuniting after a long time naturally made him happy. But while he was happy, he was also somewhat worried. In the past 9 years, he hadn't completed his mission very well. Until now, he had only occupied an isolated city with more than 30,000 soldiers and more than 100,000 people. Due to the inconvenient transportation, Wu Sheng's progress in Yangxie's development would be delayed by a lot. But he also knew that in the past 9 years, Yang Qindong had built a huge empire, made a lot of contributions, and conquered a lot of territory. In comparison, his own small achievements were somewhat unpresentable. He didn't know if the sixth young master would be satisfied or angry when he saw him. Although he said that he was alone and didn't have any support, he had brought his army with him. But after all, they had brought an army with them when they came. Although they had expanded a little compared to before, it was still very limited. This couldn't be considered a great achievement. Sigh. With a sigh, Wu Sheng was dissatisfied with his own achievements in these 9 years. When Yang Qindong was developing and growing, wasn't he also alone? At that time, he didn't have the help of these armies. But to what extent did they achieve? And to what extent did he achieve? It was really infuriating to compare oneself to others. Just as he was sighing, the head of the guards, Zhu Zhen, appeared in the small courtyard with a secret letter. Military commander, there's news. Surviving in the cracks, whether it was the Golden Horde or the Rossi Principalities, they were not existences that he could contend against. In such an environment, Wu Sheng attached great importance to intelligence work. In his opinion, a good piece of intelligence and a good intelligence officer could be equivalent to 10,000 elite soldiers at a critical time. Because of this, although he didn't expand his territory and the number of personnel was very limited, his intelligence work was progressing well. He had a stable source of information in these 2 large forces. Reaching out to take the report, Wu Sheng opened it and read. Soon, his expression became very serious. Military commander, did something big happen? Commander Zhu Zhen asked with concern. As Wu Sheng's most trusted person, he knew that ordinary small problems wouldn't attract intelligence officers to send reports. After all, spying was the best. If he didn't want to be exposed, he had to be less active. Since the report was sent, it was enough to prove that something big had happened. Looking at Wu Sheng's expression, it also confirmed this point. Yes, something big has happened. The Mongolian Khan is going to attack us. He even informed the Blind Duke. It won't be long before the enemy's troops arrive. They actually joined forces? Zhu Zhen was very shocked when he heard the news. The Mongolians and the White Russians were mortal enemies. They had been at war for hundreds of years. How could they join forces just like that? Haha, the sixth young master once said that there are no eternal friends, only eternal interests. Obviously, our existence has made some people worried, especially the sixth young master who is about to bring his main forces. They are afraid that we will attack them from the inside. Wu Sheng's face showed a trace of a bitter smile, but it was immediately replaced by a determined expression. You want to deal with me? No matter how strong you are, what can you do? Commander Zhu, we should also make some preparations. There are some things that should be settled. Chapter 14:11. Ever since the Mongols weakened and the White Russians became stronger, Wu Sheng knew that New Xia would be besieged one day, but he didn't expect it to be so soon. Presumably, it had something to do with the sixth young master's imminent arrival. If it was in the past, Wu Sheng would have considered bowing to one of the powers in exchange for some space to survive. But now, the sixth young master was coming. He should make some achievements for the world to see. He had endured humiliation for so many years, and it was time to show his sword. Zhu Zhen was also excited at this moment. Was the army commander finally going to fight a big battle? This was great. As a soldier, war was the best platform to show one's worth. He must seize this opportunity. Next, under Wu Sheng's signal, the whole New Xia became busy. The commoners were persuaded to leave one after another. They were advised to find a safe place and return only after New Xia City was completely safe. The army also began to mobilize before the war. But anyone with a mind and knowledge could feel that this was going to be a big battle. For a moment, everyone became nervous, afraid, and excited. It didn't take long for the Grand Duke of Blindness to hear about what happened in New Xia City. When he heard that New Xia was ready for war, he knew that the news must have been leaked. But he couldn't figure out whether the person who leaked the news was from the Golden Horde or his own men. He only knew that some things needed to be done quickly. He sent for his son, Ivan, to inform him of the situation. Then he asked, "How was the army's preparation? Father-in-law, the time is still too short. If the army is to be assembled and ready, it will take at least 10 to 15 months." Ivan didn't expect Wu Sheng to get the news so quickly. His face couldn't help but turn ugly. "No, it's too long. We can't wait. How about this? Isn't Kashgar the closest to New Xia? Let's mobilize troops from there first. In a while, take my order to Beojul and send troops from there. Don't ask to take the city immediately. Just entangle their main force." The blind duke shook his head. The opportunity was fleeting. Since the enemy was already prepared, they couldn't wait any longer. Otherwise, the situation would change even more as time passed. Bowler also knew that his father-in-law was right. He was also worried that the Han reinforcements wouldn't arrive as time passed. If that was the case, then it would be troublesome. He immediately gave the order to go. At the same time that the Ross Empire made the decision, the Golden Horde also sent a light cavalry of 30,000 men from the northernmost Beojul to New Xia. The two armies, one in the west and one in the south, vowed to destroy Wu Sheng in New Xia. During this period of time, the evacuation of civilians in the city was basically completed. When Wu Sheng saw that there were no longer any civilians on the originally bustling streets, he knew that it was time to abandon the city. That's right, Wu Sheng had never thought of defending New Summer City to the death. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent the commoners out of the city. As for why he wanted to defend, it was because he knew that there was an enemy spy in the new army, and this spy's status wasn't low. Now that he was about to leave the city, it was time to get rid of this spy buried in the army. Zhu Zhen passed down the order to convene the meeting. The Third Army was originally the Yang Xie's trump card. The soldiers under its command were the earliest Lung Feng soldiers. However, they hadn't received the support of a single Yang Xie soldier for 9 years. Now, the army was in chaos. They were no longer pure Han like they used to be. Apart from the Lung Feng's 3rd Division, which was still made up of Lung Feng soldiers, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Divisions were made up of young men from Mongolia and Russia. Apart from these 4 divisions, there was also the Nuzin Cavalry Division under the command of the Third Army. In a large tent, Wu Sheng sat at the head of the table. Below him stood the 3rd Division's Division Commander Chun Yang, and the Nuzin Cavalry Division's Division Commander Yila. Below them stood the 1st Division's Division Commander Min Fu, the 2nd Division's Division Commander Luo Rue, and the 3rd Division's Division Commander Dan Shi. When Wu Sheng saw that all the military officers above the division level were present, he first swept his gaze across everyone. His gaze was unfathomable. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have received intelligence that the Rossi Duchy of the Golden Horde has sent an army to our New Xia city. In line with the principle of saving the people and losing the land, I have decided to abandon New Xia city and leave this place." What? When he said this, the 5 division commanders were shocked. Obviously, this was the first time they had heard this news. Wu Sheng sat at the head of the table and saw everyone's reaction. Especially when he saw the 3rd Division's Division Commander Dan Shi, he sneered. After a long while, the 5 division commanders stopped their discussion and looked at Wu Sheng. They wanted to continue listening to their commander. They also wanted to ask, since they were not going to defend the city, why did they still dig a horse trap outside the city? What was the use of doing these useless things? Wu Sheng had already guessed what everyone was thinking. His lips moved, and he said, "I know that everyone must have a lot of questions. Well, I will explain it to you. Division Commander Dan, you say it." Dan Shi, the 3rd Division's division commander, was suddenly called out. This made him, who was already nervous and had an ugly expression, tremble uncontrollably. When he noticed that everyone was looking at him, he knew that he had to open his mouth. He pretended to be confused and said, "Military commander, why? I don't know either." "Oh, you still don't know? Don't you always tell the Great Khan of the Golden Horde about our 3rd Division's actions? Why are you saying that you don't know now? Wu Sheng said with interest. The moment Wu Sheng's words fell, Dan Shi's expression changed drastically. He instinctively wanted to draw his saber, but Zhu Zhen, who had been watching him from the side, was one step faster than him. He grabbed Dan Shi's right arm and restrained him with a twist of his arm. He didn't forget to say, "What's wrong, Division Commander Dan? Are you going to reveal your true intentions?" Dan Shi rolled his eyes and immediately shouted, "It's a misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding. Why would I draw my sword? Oomph. What you want to do, everyone can see it clearly. Do you think you can still quibble at this time? Men, take him away." Zhu Zhen shouted coldly, and 4 soldiers from the guard regiment walked in from outside the hall. They were holding ropes, and it was obvious that they were prepared. They tied Dan Shi up tightly in no time. Seeing that he could no longer move, Dan Shi knew that his plan was over. He had no choice but to risk everything and shout, "Surrender! How can you be a match for the Golden Horde? If you surrender now, I can put in a few good words for you and spare your lives." Shut his mouth and behead him. Wu Sheng, who was sitting at the head of the table, pulled a long face. He was about to die, but he still wanted to bewitch others. Even if he was killed 1,000 times, it wouldn't be too much. Dan Shi was taken away, and the hall became quiet again. However, it could be seen that everyone's faces were a little ugly, especially the head of the 1st Division, Min Fu. He was originally half Mongolian, and like Dan Shi, he was not a pure Han. He was also worried that the same method would be used on him. But Wu Sheng changed his angry look and comforted. Dan Shi is willing to be a dog of the Golden Horde. That is his ambition. But he shouldn't betray the 5-star army for his promotion and wealth. So it's not a pity to kill him. But you are different. You are loyal. I know this, and so does Bugnam of Gojoseon. You can relax. With these words, everyone's expression became better. Especially Chun Yang, the commander of the 3rd Division, and Yi La, the commander of the Nuzing Cavalry Division. There was a faint excitement in their eyes. Both of them had fought with Yang Qindong and knew how powerful the 6th young master was. They had received news that the 6th young master was coming from Siberia. They should be able to meet him soon. Thinking that the 6th young master was coming, their bitter days would come to an end. Now was the time for them to perform well. They couldn't help but feel a little excited. Now, they naturally listened to Wu Sheng's words. Wu Sheng was also in a good mood. After dealing with the traitor, Dan Shi, he felt more at ease. He ordered, "Gan Fong will take over the position of the 3rd Division's commander. Everyone else's position will remain unchanged." After the meeting, everyone should prepare to leave the city. This time, I want to disappoint the enemy. They spent a lot of effort, but still couldn't find us. To put it nicely, it was a strategic retreat. To put it bluntly, it was a retreat. Wu Sheng had no choice. With more than 30,000 men under his command, he really couldn't fight the enemy head-on. Otherwise, he would be digging his own grave. After the meeting, the division commanders returned to their troops. Half a day later, New Summer City became an empty city. Except for the city walls and houses that couldn't be moved, nothing that could be used in the future was left behind. 2 days later, the 30,000 infantrymen of the Ross Duchy, led by Ivan, were the first to arrive outside New Summer City. When they saw the city gates open, they didn't dare to enter directly. Instead, they arranged for 100 people to enter the city to take a look. Only after he was certain that everyone in the city had left did he enter the city. As soon as they entered, they saw an extremely poor and empty city. After searching for half a day, they couldn't find a single grain of food. As for cattle, horses, and sheep, they couldn't even find their feces. Half a day later, the 30,000 cavalrymen of the Golden Horde arrived and got the same result. Chapter 14:12. Ivan was naturally very angry that Wu Sheng had retreated without a fight. What made him even angrier was that the general of the Golden Horde actually wanted to occupy a city that had nothing. In a fit of anger, he ordered his men to burn down all the houses in New Summer City and tear down the city walls. He even had someone leave a letter on the broken city wall with the words, "Wu Sheng is a coward," written in large letters. Ivan left angrily, leaving behind the general of the Golden Horde, who didn't know whether to laugh or cry. There was nothing to linger about in such a deserted city. He had no choice but to retreat and report back to his superiors. When New Summer City regained its silence and desolation, the scouts sent by Wu Sheng rushed back. When they saw that the city had been destroyed to this point, they were naturally very angry. Especially when they saw the words left on the broken wall, they turned around and left. They wanted to tell the army commander what had happened here and let the army commander make a decision. In the forest, not far away, Wu Sheng met the scouts who had returned to report and learned of what had happened in New Summer City. His eyes immediately turned blood red. He was very angry. The destruction of the city meant that his years of hard work had been destroyed. How dare they call him a coward? Did they really think that he couldn't do anything to them? Gather all troops. Target Toph City. Set out. Wu Sheng decided to give them a taste of their own medicine. Although he didn't have the strength to attack a strong city, he had no problem dealing with a few small cities in the Ross Duchy. As long as he was fast enough and retreated in time, there shouldn't be any problems in terms of safety. The army commander made the decision. Although the division commanders thought that it was a little hasty, there was no such military plan before. But when they heard that New Summer City had been completely destroyed, they were all angry. No one tried to persuade the army commander, so they decided to take revenge. Toph City was about the size of county. It was the northernmost city of the Ross Duchy. There were no more than 1,000 soldiers stationed here, and only about 20,000 civilians. A small city like this had neither resources nor wealth. Very few people would take a fancy to it. Therefore, when Wu Sheng appeared outside the city with more than 30,000 cavalrymen and entered the city without much effort, the people here either ran or fled. Those who couldn't escape would simply close their doors and hide in their homes, not daring to make a sound. Only a few people were injured, and they were injured by the Ross Empire's muskets. However, they were able to take over Toph City. This made Wu Sheng and the others feel less angry. Seeing that it was getting late, they decided to rest here for the night. They would also rob the city's storage of food and leave the next morning. It had only been one night, and there was no prior plan for this operation. Presumably, even the Russian Empire would not be able to find out about his goal. Wu Sheng, who was very confident about this, found a relatively large courtyard and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, the sound of galloping horses could be heard. The head of the guards, Zhu Zhen, pushed open the door and entered. He said with a panicked expression, "Military commander, something bad has happened. There are many people outside the city, and they have surrounded us." "There's such a thing?" While feeling shocked, Wu Sheng put on his armor and quickly rushed up the tower. At this moment, several teachers were standing on top of the city gate tower. All of them had solemn expressions. Clearly, they had realized that the situation was not good. After Wu Sheng reached the top of the city gate tower, all he could see were torches. The number of enemies gave him a feeling that it was impossible to count. "Military commander, it's too dark. We can't see how many enemies are coming. We also don't know which direction to charge in. What should we do?" 3rd Division Commander Chunyang walked over and asked for military orders. Wu Sheng was not a god. If others couldn't see clearly, he naturally couldn't see clearly either. However, as a military commander, he still had the calmness that he should have. "Don't panic. We'll deal with whatever comes our way. Since we've been surrounded, we won't be able to figure out if there's an ambush outside. We might as well stay here and wait for reinforcements to come and rescue us. When the time comes, a bad thing will turn into a good thing." Although he said it so confidently, it frightened the other teachers. They were waiting for the military commander to decide which direction to break out of the encirclement, but they didn't expect that they would have to defend the city. Seeing that everyone's expression was not good, Wu Sheng said confidently, "What? Have you all forgotten? The 6th young master will be here soon. As long as we spread the news, it won't take long for reinforcements to arrive. We are no longer homeless children, rootless duckweeds." "Yes, yes." Chunyang nodded. "Then we'll defend the city." There's a lot of food in the city. We can hold on for a while until the sixth young master arrives. That will be the time for us to take revenge. Division Commander Yi Dai was also excited. As high-ranking officers who joined the five-star army early on, they all treated Yang Chendong like a god. It was as if as long as the sixth young master arrived, there was nothing that couldn't be solved. Since the two teachers had expressed their opinions, the other three teachers couldn't say anything. Although they didn't know why everyone was so confident, the discipline in the five-star army was strict. Once the military commander gave an order, everyone had to follow it. Otherwise, they would be beheaded. Seeing that everyone agreed, Wu Sheng said, "If that's the case, then send someone out to deliver the message. We have to inform the sixth young master as soon as possible." "HM, is Vice Division Commander Lu Dai here?" "I am here." The Deputy Division Commander of the Nuzhen Cavalry Division, Lu Dai, stepped forward. "The sixth young master knows about you. This time, you'll be the one to deliver the message. Don't worry, you'll only take a few people out. They'll only treat you as a decoy and won't chase after you. Remember, before we find the main force, we can't rest for a moment. The hope of the Third Army is all on you." Wu Sheng walked up and patted Lu Dai's shoulder. "Yes." Lu Dai felt a lot of pressure. He saluted and repeated, "Please don't worry. Even if I die from exhaustion, I won't rest for a moment before we find the main force." Lu Dai left with less than 100 cavalry out of the city. Sure enough, as Wu Sheng had said, the enemy soldiers on the outer perimeter only stopped them for a moment and then let them go. With the help of the enemy's torches, Wu Sheng heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Lu Dai and the others had broken out of the encirclement. He then confidently said to everyone, "Leave a small group of people behind to guard the city. The rest of you can go back and sleep. Don't worry, it's so dark. We can't rush out, and the enemy won't rush in." Being able to remain calm, even if Mount Tai collapses in front of you, was the style of a general. On this point, Wu Sheng had done it. In fact, his heart was not as calm as it seemed on the surface. He did not know where Yang Chendong had gone with the main army, nor did he know if Lu Dai could find them. However, as the commander of an army and the main general of the army, he had to cheer everyone on at this moment. Outside Tove City, Ivan was leading 70,000 White Russians to the city gate. They were waiting for Wu Sheng to escape. Their muskets were loaded with solid cartridges, their horses were saddled, and their soldiers were ready to provide support to the enemy at any time. Ivan was the one who burned down New Summer City and left the message. He didn't want to leave an empty city for the Golden Horde's army to live in, but he was also preparing to lure Wu Sheng into action. Previously, his relationship with Wu Sheng was quite good, so he had a good understanding of this person. He knew that such a hot-blooded man couldn't be provoked. So after he left New Summer City, he sent out a large number of scouts to keep an eye on these small cities. His intuition told him that Wu Sheng wouldn't let this go so easily. Sure enough, just as he met up with the 50,000 reinforcements sent by the duchy, he received a report that the Third Army was spotted outside Tove City. Immediately, he rushed over with his army and blocked the way. Ivan was satisfied, but he didn't let his guard down. After all, it was nighttime. The enemy couldn't see him, and he couldn't see them either. So he immediately ordered his men not to attack unless they had his orders. He had to wait for the New Summer Army's main force to leave the city before attacking. Because of this order, Lu Dai and his cavalry weren't troubled too much when they left. But after half a day, they still didn't see any movement in the city. This time, General Shigao was suspicious. "Gongzi, could it be that Wu Sheng who escaped just now?" "Impossible." Without any hesitation, Ivan said with certainty, "Wu Sheng is a man with a strong sense of pride. Running away from a battle is not something he would do." Because they were once friends, he dared to say this with confidence. Although he didn't know what Wu Sheng was thinking, he was confident that there would be a bloody battle between the two of them. The next step would be to see who was more powerful. The night passed just like that. Compared to the five-star army, the White Russian army outside the city was much worse off. They had to be on guard against the people in the city escaping, so they didn't sleep much. So when the sun rose, the White Russian army didn't have the energy to immediately charge. When the sun rose, Wu Sheng, who was on the city wall, saw the White Russian army's true strength. When he saw that the enemy had an army of 70,000, with 30,000 cavalry and 20,000 musketeers, he could not help but rejoice that he had not rashly attacked last night. Otherwise, who knew how many soldiers he would have lost when the musketeers fired in the night? After seeing the enemy's true strength, Wu Sheng knew that this was going to be a tough battle. He placed all his hopes on Lu Dai, who had gone out to report the situation. As for himself, there was only one thing he had to do, and that was to set up a trap. For example, the White Russian army didn't immediately attack the city. This was what he wanted. He ordered his soldiers to defend the city well. There was no need to provoke the enemy. Then, he went to check the city's warehouse. He had to calculate carefully to see how long the city's rations could last and how long he could last. He also wanted to see how much kerosene, wooden sleepers, and bows were left to defend the city. If they weren't complete, he would have to demolish the houses in the city. This was all thanks to the engine prototype that Yang Shindong had proposed, and after pushing it back, the experiment was finally successful. Historically, in 1679 AD, the French physicist Denis Barbin built the first working model of a steam engine after watching steam escape from his pressure cooker. His contemporary, Samuel Moran, also proposed the idea of a steam engine. Now that they had appeared more than 200 years earlier, Yang Shindong did not dare to imagine how great of an advantage they would have. Although the vacuum steam engine was now used to pump water into the mine, the principle was that after steam was introduced into the cylinder, the valve was closed, and then cold water was poured into the cylinder. When the steam condensed, it created a vacuum. The air pressure on the other side of the piston pushed the piston. In the mine, a rod that went deep into the shaft was connected to drive a pump. The movement of the steam engine's piston was transmitted through the rod to the pump's piston to pump water out of the well. But no matter what, there was still a steam engine. If there was one, there would be two. He saw hope. To the people of the future, this thing was not complicated. To put it bluntly, a steam engine needed a boiler that boiled water to produce high-pressure steam. This boiler could use wood, coal, oil, natural gas, or even combustible garbage as a heat source. The steam expanded to push the piston to work. Once the steam engine technology matured, it was widely used in power stations, factories, locomotives, ships, and other fields. It was especially used on warships as the only prime mover at that time. After the telegram was sent, Yang Shindong was excited and happy for a while. He knew that with the steam engine, whether it was mining or other fields, the efficiency would increase a lot. This was the beginning of real industrial development. He personally wrote a telegram praising the research team led by Feng Ku. He also gave a large reward and a second-class medal to show their merit. Yang Xie had a total of 7 medals, representing 7 different merits. From low to high, they were iron, bronze, silver, gold medals, third class, second class, and the highest level, first class medal. These medals were not only a symbol of status and honor, but they could also be used to exchange for large amounts of money and land with the Yang faction. In times of crisis, they could even save one's life and had some of the effects of the death exemption medal. This was a good thing that everyone in the Yang faction wanted, especially a second-class medal. As a second-class medal, it could probably be used to offset any mistakes other than those that committed a rebellion. This was the first time such a medal was issued, and Feng Ku was the first recipient. It was clear that Yang Shindong valued him highly. It was also clear that technology was the #1 development force. Who knew how many people were envious and jealous of him? At the same time, Yang Shindong also asked the other party to build more steam engines and continue to improve them, so that they could be a great help to Yang Xie's development. In a good mood, Yang Shindong, who was riding on the white dragon, had a smile on his face. It wasn't until another telegram was sent in front of him that his good mood was broken. The telegram was sent by the commander of the world's first cavalry army, Tianhu. It said that the cavalry scouts he sent out met the deputy division commander of the Third Army, Lu Dai, at the border between the Ural region and the Northwest region. He learned from Lu Dai that the Third Army was besieged in Tove City and was waiting for reinforcements. Lu Dai didn't disappoint Wu Sheng. He led less than 80 cavalry out of the encirclement and ran for 3 days tirelessly. Along the way, many people fell behind and many died of exhaustion on the way to deliver the message. Finally, when Lu Dai was tired and hungry, he finally met the scouts of the world's first cavalry army and was able to send the message. This telegram didn't only say that Wu Sheng was besieged, it also said that the Golden Horde and the Ross Duchy were very hostile towards the Five-Star Army. Yang Qindong didn't expect that because of his sudden appearance, the two feuds would temporarily join forces. This wasn't a good thing for Yang Qindong, who was an outsider, and he couldn't allow this to happen. If they joined forces, then cut them off. Send a telegram to Commander Tian, who to rush to Tove City at all costs to save Wu Sheng and the other soldiers. At the same time, order my army to speed up. We will quickly give the Golden Horde a fierce blow. Tell them that this king is here. Yang Qindong said with an unfriendly expression. He always believed that if you offend me, I will pay you back. Many times, he even took the initiative to look for trouble. Now, how could he back down just because these two forces joined forces? Moreover, this so-called alliance, in Yang Qindong's eyes, was more of a sign. He didn't believe that they would really care about each other's survival. They probably wanted each other to die early. This was his chance to destroy them one by one. After the telegram was sent, Tian, who saw the contents, and his expression brightened. The world's first cavalry army hadn't fought a hard battle since the expansion of the Free Division. Now is the time to challenge themselves. As the commander, Tian, who had always wanted to prove that Yang Qindong's choice was right. This expansion of the army not only greatly increased the number of soldiers, but also the strength of the army. Yang Xie's expenditure on the world's first cavalry army was worth it. Men call 2nd Division Commander Lu Duo and 4th Division Commander Su De Tian, whose voice was loud as he looked to the west. At this moment, his heart was filled with fighting spirit. Tove City. 7 days had passed. In these 7 days, Ivan led the White Russian army to attack dozens of times. With the help of the musketeers, the soldiers climbed up the city walls many times, but were chased down by Wu Sheng soldiers. In these 7 days, both the attackers and the defenders had paid a heavy price. Tove City was also riddled with holes and looked like a fragile egg. Especially with the White Russian army's cannons in place, the attack would probably start tomorrow. In history, the reason why Ivan was able to succeed his father and lead the Russians to defeat the Golden Horde and achieve independence was because of the importance of their firearms. Otherwise, in terms of cold weapons, who would be a match for the Mongolian cavalry? At this time, the Rossi Duchy had bought many firearms from the West and had built some factories to develop firearms. In history, they were a military power, but now they were just in the embryonic stage. Even so, under the constant pressure of the Golden Horde, the Rossi Duchy's progress was quite fast. Although their foundation was weaker, in terms of combat strength, they were much stronger than the Great Ming Dynasty. This was what it meant when there was pressure, there was motivation. Relying on the flintlock in his hand, Ivan didn't suffer much during the siege, and it was only a 1 versus 2 battle. As the cannons were sent to the front line, one could imagine that the initiative was completely in his hands. As expected of a general, you actually forced me to this point. General Wu, tomorrow I will not hold back. Ivan stared fiercely at Tove City, which was 2 miles away, with his large, spirited eyes. After that, he turned around and left. He admired Wu Sheng and gave him absolute respect, which was to attack with all his might. Even so, he still let Wu Sheng defend the city for 7 days. Ivan could not help but sigh at Wu Sheng's strength. However, he knew that with the appearance of firearms, individual bravery was no longer important. Tomorrow, he would definitely break into the city. At that time, he would give Wu Sheng a chance to return to his side. Otherwise, he would have to kill him. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.